Hello, this is Kris Nelson for EvolveConsciousness.org. I will be reading the article Illusions of the Senses, Self-Knowledge Barriers Part 3. I just need to mention that by illusions of the senses, I don't mean that the senses are illusory and they cannot provide us with any valuable information, as everything they provide is an illusion. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that your senses can provide you with illusory data if you do not have enough data points, if you do not have a large enough data set, if you do not have enough vantage points, if you do not have enough perspectives. So the main image I have, it looks fine. You look at it, okay, the ball goes up the steps. So it looks fine at first, but then you see that it's an optical illusion because you cannot have an infinite staircase that regresses back on itself and its own beginning is its own end. It doesn't work. So once you understand that something doesn't work, that what you're seeing doesn't make sense, then you can move around and get a 360-degree view to increase your perspective, your vantage point, your data set, and the data points you have in that data set, and then you can better understand what's going on. Because if this was in reality, all you'd have to do was move over a few inches to either your left or your right, and you would see the disjointed aspect from the staircase at the bottom corner. You'd see where it's not connected and how it fools us. Or it's either the one at the left, the corner at the left. I'm not sure, I don't remember. But all you'd have to do is move and you'd see, oh, they're not actually connected. It's only an illusion for me to look like they're connected. Or the steps on the left at the bottom, they're actually pointing down, but they're only jagged. The lines are made to look like they're going up, but the stairs actually go down. But because the angle we're looking at it, the angle can change, 360-degree angle. When you change your angle, you'll see that they're not actually going up, the stairs are actually going down, but the angles of the lines are made to look like it goes up, even though it doesn't. So all you have to do is change your perspective. That's what this is all about, is having more data, more correspondences to enable you to find the truth more accurately. Because if you just accept things as you see them, then you're going to be in the world of illusions and appearances, in unreality, inauthenticity, unexamined. Because you're not examining reality, you're not examining the things before your eyes, the things before your senses. So you're living an unexamined life in inauthenticity as a false self in the world of appearances and illusions and deceptions and manipulation. You're not actually seeing the substance of what's really there, which is not an infinite staircase. You're not seeing that substance. You're seeing the appearance, the illusion. So that's the main point I want to make before I get started. I'm not talking about how senses are illusory and cannot be trusted. Even though it might sound like I'm saying that in a few places, I'm just illustrating how the senses can't always be trusted if you just look at one vantage point, one perspective, one data point in your data set, and you don't build up more data. You don't go around in the different degrees to change your angle of perspective to see more things. So to begin with the article, and this was posted on the 17th of January 2014. It's over a year ago. Following the previous two articles on worldview, choices, and imagination, this article will bring these concepts into correlation with how the quantum micro-reality operates. There are conceptual walls that block us from gaining knowledge about ourselves. We are conditioned with many constructs as we grow in our particular environments. We then perpetuate ways of living as was done to us. We perpetuate a lack of understanding who and what we are. We are conditioned into social constructs that limit our possibilities and choice potentials. Distinguishing truth from falsehood will allow us to understand the root causal factors for our collective condition. Self-knowledge, self-realization, etc. allows us to let go of the attachment to identification in false beliefs and delusions. Truth about the reality in the world and in ourselves is about distinguishing what is an accurate perception of reality from what is real. distinguishing what is an inaccurate perception of reality from what is real. We can recognize what is good, right, and true for our betterment and align with it, or remain in failure of recognition and alignment. The different choices and decisions of possibilities and potentials for a change, growth, improvement, betterment, evolution, etc., for each of us individually and collectively, are in our hands. Breaking down the barriers and attachment to illusion, falsehood, lies, and deception can only be done by each one of us on our own, but others can assist and influence. Failure to distinguish truth from falsehood is the reason we are in our current condition. Self-realization is determining truth from falsehood based in using our real eyes to realize the real lies, acknowledging the false, letting go of attachment to it, and aligning with what is good, right, and true is the way out of our mess. In The Matrix, Neo's eyes hurt after being brought into the light of reality. He is told he has never used his eyes before. Most of us are not using our real eyes because we are not self-realized beings. We live in fantasy illusion beliefs we base our lives upon because we are attached to them at the level of ego-personality identification. The false worldview can be shed by coming out of the mind control we are embedded in, by learning and understanding more about the reality of ourselves within and the current condition of the world around us. Our false perceptions are the largest hurdle to everyone. We do not see things as they truly are. We need to understand how the world really functions and how we operate as human beings. We need to align our perceptions with what is in reality and not remain attached to identification with illusions that keep us in self-inflicted cycles of suffering. Prior to developing technology to perceive bacteria, an atom, electrons, UV light, infrared light, etc., people would say those things do not exist because they could not be experienced. Because they could not experience it. Because they could not see it. Do things not exist simply because we don't perceive them? No, but we often fool ourselves by limiting our understanding of reality. This can lead us to accept what is false and refuse to accept what is true, all because we trust in the infallibility of our perceptions. The next section is illusion of the five senses: see, smell, hear, taste, touch. The illusion of the five senses consists in limiting one's worldview and what is a part of reality to that which our senses perceive. Our capacity to see, smell, touch, and hear with our bodies and the technological devices that extend sensory detection become the boundaries for what constitutes the reality we all live in. The five senses are an illusion because the illusion prevents an understanding of what is beyond the limited tools we have to perceive the reality we exist in. We negate things from being possible or simply being extant because they do not conform to our perception of reality. That's why you have one perception or maybe two, and you think something's a certain way, but you don't have more perceptions, you don't have more perspectives, you don't have more angles of view. And so your conclusion might be completely erroneous because you're only seeing things from the illusory perspective of looking at the infinite staircase. Then you make your conclusions on that. You're not moving around to look at it differently, to understand how it really manifests. So some people want to deny, oh, there's no prime mover, there's no ultimate causer. Well, you don't know that. You just want to deny it as an ontological argument, when other people can use logic and can look at reality and say, well, things require a cause, and then eventually they get to a prime causal mover. But other people want to stay in their limited perspectives and only look at reality and say, well, these are the only things we can point to that therefore exist, so therefore anything else that you can't point to right in front of my eyes, well, therefore it doesn't exist. So there is no prime mover and ultimate cause because I can't see it. And these are the empiricists, the logical positivists, and all the other people who are flawed in limiting their understanding of reality. I'm not saying there is definitely a prime mover or an ultimate cause or whatever, but logically it does make sense, even if you don't have any proof. There is a manifested reality that includes things both smaller and larger than us in scales of size, heat, frequency, and electromagnetism. Our ability to detect and perceive all of reality is limited. Our attachment to the erroneous conclusions, assessments, evaluations, and judgments of what we perceive in reality is what has us manifesting our self-inflicted suffering. The attachment to these false beliefs is what makes the five senses an illusion to base our lives upon. So you see, your perception is restricted by your false beliefs that you are attached to that construct your ego personality identity construct, your sense of self, your self-concept, and your worldview. So these beliefs prevent you from seeing things accurately because you're mixing in what you see, and your perceptions are being convoluted by the preconceived beliefs, which are false. Yeah. I guess that's all I have to say about that little interjection. The five senses can be deceived into accepting false presentations of reality as true reality. The attachment to perceiving reality solely based on the five senses prevents us from coming to a position and perspective of realization based on who we truly are, apart from these identifications with false beliefs. So to interject again, which is related to what I was saying, is if you're limiting your understanding of reality based on what you can see only with your eyes, and you're not using your mind and your imagination and logic to progress down into the hidden dimensions of consciousness and the inner workings of the external individual particulars in reality, such as ourselves or a leaf or a rock, and going within it more to understand what things are made of and how things got here, well, then you're not going to understand reality very well, because you're only using your limited five senses and the limited data points you have, and you're not going beyond them. You're not seeing past a veil of the physical reality. You're not going into the realm of mind and consciousness and heart and delving deeper into things that you can't see. Like love. Oh, love doesn't exist. You can't see it. It's not detectable. Those are just chemical reactions in the body. Okay, but it's a word to describe something that we can experience. So whether it's tangible or not, it's still something real. So there are things that are real beyond the five senses. To continue with the article, the attachment to false beliefs we base aspects of our identity on is what limits our potential to self-realization, self-knowledge, self-awareness, self-discovery, self-dominion, and sovereignty. Attachment to illusions is what ensures we continue to manifest our self-inflicted suffering. We tacitly accept and buy into the perception presented to us, the world views espoused in the media, and the conditioning of habits, behaviors, and actions from those around us. That would be order following and indoctrination. Conditioning of habits and behaviors and actions by our parents, teachers, society, everybody. We're all order followers until we start to really think for ourselves. An examination of matter and frequency determines the limitations of the five senses. An examination of matter and frequency demonstrates, not determines, the limitation of the five senses. So you can see in matter and frequency and how they relate, how the five senses are limited in understanding just in that way. Just at looking at things physically, you don't understand the other aspects of hidden reality. Limiting our understanding, definition, meaning, and focus to only the material physical matter realm of being keeps us attached to those perceptions and prevents us from paying attention to the realm of mind, mental, thought, spiritual, etc. This produces identification with the physical body and believing the body is who we are, instead of understanding the body as an aspect of who we are that serves the purpose of allowing us to experience the physical reality. Subsection Deceptions from the senses. So we have seeing, You see, our aesthetic affinity to be pleased with sight and trust in what we see with our eyes as being correct or right is not always so. Many optical illusions exist to demonstrate this, as I've already demonstrated. So smell, usually bad things smell bad to help us discern, but we in our creative capacities can create good smelling poisons and such. So all the sugar stuff, all the candy that rots teeth and poisons the body, we can make things taste good and smell good. Doesn't matter, they're not good. That's how our senses can it's easily demonstrated by our smell and taste how our senses can deceive us. Hear. We often mishear what someone said or hear sounds that are not produced by an original source, but they are recreated sounds made by electronic devices to simulate natural sounds. A real bird's sound can be the same as an artificially created one. Taste. We choose what to eat based on taste, but most of the food available does taste good for the affinity of aesthetic pleasure appeasement in the taste buds. But the food is not actually good for our bodies, minds, and spiritual interconnected complexes. We can create things or do things that feel good to the touch or provide pleasing tactile sensations, and we think them good because they are pleasing and comfortable, but it can distract from the negatives of what happens in the long term, how it affects others by seeking such pleasure as the driving force in life. All five senses tie into perception of reality and the malleability of how we perceive reality based on accurate or inaccurate perceptions through the five senses. We have an affinity to those things that please our senses. That which pleases our sight, ears, taste, smell, and tactile sensations is highly sought after. We seek pleasure. To live one's life determined by the pleasure-seeking motives of the five senses leads to a degenerate understanding of what is right, good, and true. Aesthetic affinity towards living in the pleasure of five-sense gratification drives someone to favor their own personal comfort and living conditions to determine their choices in life. They do not care much about what is true versus false, nor what is right versus wrong. They do not care how their own choices and decisions to maximize their pleasure and comfort affect others around them in the world. One's own personal survival and standard of living supersede the negative consequences of one's actions. Excuses, justifications, and defensive rationalizations are engaged in to validate self-images and self-concepts about themselves in order to maintain doing what they currently do and feel good about themselves. The next subsection is frequencies. The two main frequencies we experience every day are light and sound. Our eyes and ears can only detect a small range of frequencies that exist in reality. And here is an infographic about the frequency of light, where we can see below the ultraviolet and above the infrared. And also it works similarly in sound, where we can't hear below 20 hertz and we can't hear above 20,000 hertz. So much like the ultraviolet, there is ultrasound, which we can't hear up to, and like the infrared, there is infrasound, which is too low for us to hear. The visible light spectrum that we see is a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, where we see above the infrared and below the ultraviolet frequencies. We cannot see below the infrared or above the ultraviolet. These frequencies cannot be detected, but they do exist. The physical detector called the eye cannot decode them to be perceived, so we do not see them. Other animals can see the infrared, and others can see or detect the ultraviolet. We can't perceive them, but they exist. Similarly, dogs, bats, elephants, and other animals have equipment that differ from human animals in that they can hear below or above the range of frequencies that are audible to us. A dog whistle produces a sound that we cannot recognize to be there. The range of frequency is beyond the scope of the human ear. We can't perceive these sounds, but they exist. The attachment to perception as reality type of thinking needs to be shed. Our biological senses do not reflect the totality of frequencies permeating our reality. Limiting our understanding of reality by attachment to the illusion of the five senses prevents us from reaching new levels of understanding about reality and ourselves. We can easily be manipulated into living in a perception of reality that does not reflect the real world, choosing to live our lives by the dictates of false perceptions can have us walking a false path and doing great harm. Here are other charts of the electromagnetic spectrum representing different aspects of reality and their interrelation. Since everything is energy of some kind at the micro level, we are all essentially made of energy, and we can view everything in terms of energy or frequency. These items are very interesting to analyze and understand to get a bigger picture of the nature of reality. So again, it's a correlation between the frequencies and the colors and also the size of objects. So you'll have larger scale objects, humans, and then bigger than that you'll have planets and solar systems and galaxies. And that's at a lower rate of vibration, which was compared to the infrared. And then as you get smaller into the cells and the DNA and the atoms and then the subatomic particles, you'll have a higher frequency rate of vibration, which is similar to the ultraviolet. Yeah, and that's it. So you can see in the size scale where things fit in our reality and relative to the electromagnetic spectrum. And anyways, it's very interesting to see how this is all about size scales and how the size scales relate to the electromagnetic frequency as well. Just correspondences in different aspects of our reality. The next subsection is matter. We accept what we see. Once an acceptance is taken in, contrary evidence is often ignored and denied because we become attached to what we have accepted. Many people are attached to understanding matter as completely solid and deny any other possible way for matter to be constructed. The smallest unit of matter we can see is what we refer to as the atom. The components of the atom at the quantum level are very small, and some fluctuate at incredible speeds we can scarcely imagine. This motion and flux creates solidity at the most micro level. That's where the solidity starts to form, even though there's a lot of space. Matter has four main states: solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. The arrangement of atoms in each state differ to give it the different state of physicality or tangibility. The most solid has atoms arranged in an order, in rank and file, while the other states of matter become less ordered. So we have the solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. The solid is regular repeating patterns. You can even see them in zoom-in videos of the stuff. Like I think the next one, the video I have on steel will show it. Then you have liquid, where they flow easily around each other. They're not set up as a grid, but they are still tightly packed. And then you have gas, where the molecules fly in all directions at great speeds. So they're never really touching. And then you have plasma. It's very high temperature, like stars, and where atoms lose their electrons to become free electrons. So this is where the nuclei and the electrons mix, and apparently it's a plasma state of matter. This is you'll find it in my research into the electric universe is the first time I encountered the term. Plasma is something real. I always used to think of it as like ectoplasmic goo or something from Ghostbusters or whatnot. But Yeah, when I looked into the electric universe many years ago, and that's where the plasma comes from. You can see it in arcs of electricity and in experiments, and call it plasma. And I'm a novice in this stuff, I don't know much about it. So here is a video on zooming into steel.
To the naked eye, this is just a broken-toothed gear. It's made of conventional steel composed mainly of iron and a small amount of carbon. This small quantity of carbon is enough to protect the gear from corrosion, but not enough to make it indestructible over time. To increase steel's resistance, other elements are added: nickel, manganese, chrome. This way, hundreds of different types of steel are made. As we move closer, this fracture allows us to discover the structure of the alloy. A rugged landscape materializes. Here and there, a scattering of white specks. They're tiny particles of dust that have settled on the surface. Each of these petal-shaped forms is a particle of steel called dendrite. An alloy of iron and carbon, dendrite is found in all solid matter that crystallizes in cooling. It's found in steel, aluminium, and even in snowflakes. When cooled rapidly, steel increases in strength, a process known as tempering. Between the particles, a cavity is outlined. We'll continue our journey through this hole, which is probably due to the aging of the metal. In the background, a grain of pearlite emerges from the shadows. It's easily recognized by its characteristic sliced structure. The thick black diagonal cutting through the pearlite contains a little more carbon than the lighter areas around it. So do the other thin lines. It's this extra carbon that gives the darker color. The fuzzy black and white flecks are faults in the structure brought into focus by the microscope. At maximum enlargement, a series of tiny regular spots appear. Here, at last, is the atomic structure of steel. Atoms of iron and carbon regularly stacked in all directions. Beyond this, nothing more is visible, for the moment.
Alright, so there you see, when you zoom in, not on all matter, but in this case on steel, you zoom in and you can see the atoms in their electron orbit flux pulse modulation. You see the orbs, and those are the atoms, where you're only seeing the electron shell as they fluctuate instantaneously out of existence and into existence in order to form that spheroid shape. And that's what we see as atoms, because the frequency of vibration is so quick that it appears as solid for the camera that can see a picture in an instant, in one frame of time. But in that frame of time, for the picture to take a snapshot of reality, the electrons in the atom are going so quickly in and out of existence that it appears as a solid shell. So matter is solid at the macro-physical level we experience. Matter retains a physical property as the scale gets smaller until a certain point. At the micro level of quantum mechanics, things are not so solid. Atoms are composed of forces or energies that fluctuate. These atomic level components are referred to as electrons, protons, and neutrons. They are composed of subatomic particles, except for the electron, which is an elementary particle. There is so much space in an atom that if you make a golf ball the size of the nucleus in an atom, the electron cloud would be 1.5 miles away. So in the video, you had the electron cloud, and then inside you'd have the nucleus of the neutrons and protons. And the fluctuation of the electron shell is what creates that solidity. If you could go quick enough to take only a snapshot of one fluctuation or one instance of a fluctuation or in between a fluctuation or something, maybe you'd catch five electrons in one particular place. But because they go so quick, it appears as one solid shell like a golf ball. Electrons are said to pop in and out of existence in a fluctuating orbit around the nucleus. They do not go around like a planet around a sun, which was the old model. Electrons in an atom pop in and out so fast that it makes a cloud like solidity appear. So here I have an image where there's an atom, which is a billionth of an inch, and you have your electrons, whose diameter is at least 1,000 times smaller than that of the nucleus itself, and the nucleus is 100,000 times smaller than the atom itself, and the atom was already only a billionth of an inch. So take an inch, put the space between your two fingers, an inch, and then divide that space into a billion parts, and then one of those billion parts is the size of an atom, and then 100,000 times smaller than that 1 billionth part is the size of the nucleus. That's how small everything is. It's amazing. And it creates the reality we have of physicality, things that do exist. Oh yes, they do exist. The space between various atomic level components and their states of fluctuation is empty in the sense that it does not currently contain those particular components, which are the electrons, protons, and neutrons, but it's not empty because there are other fluctuating forces that permeate in between the larger components as they also fluctuate. What I'm saying is, you have the atom, right? The structure of the atom, you have the protons and neutrons at the middle in the nucleus, and then you have the electrons, so-called orbiting, popping in and out of existence so quickly that it creates an electron cloud. Now, these are all fluctuations. The cloud, if you recall different models of the electron, there's the different valence, the different orbits of the electrons. Now, if you heat an atom, this will get into double slit experiment, which is how they released the electron in order to fire it, as in a quote gun. You heat up a particular piece of matter to a point that electrons are released. They subsequently go up through the orbital, or what was considered orbital layers in the atom. So you have the different valence as it goes up or down in terms of the charge in that atom. And sometimes too much heat will make the electron pop out and it'll become a free electron. I think it's called a free electron. Anyways, they pop them off the atoms by heating them up. That's how they do the double slit experiment with the electron gun. That's how a cathode ray tube works in a television. With electricity, you heat it up, and then particles fly off and they hit something. So in the case of a TV, the electrons fly off into a cathode ray tube, and that produces the image, versus the double slit experiment, you're flying them off and you're getting them to hit a screen in order to create the double slit experiment. So what I'm talking about here is about the video on empty space is not empty. Now, in between the things that we can detect, there's also things that we can't detect and see, like the electrons, protons, and neutrons. And these would be other fields. So here's the video.
One of the most amazing things about atoms is that they are mainly empty space. If an atom were as wide as your arm span, then the electrons would all be whizzing about inside the volume enclosed by your fingertips. Meanwhile, the nucleus would be sitting in the center, and its diameter would be smaller than the width of a single human hair. So all of the atoms that make up you and me and all the seemingly solid things in the universe are mostly empty space. Now, this is incredible, but what is even more mind-boggling is that empty space is not truly empty. I know because I've seen it. This is a simulation by Professor Derek Lineweber at the University of Adelaide. It was made using a supercomputer to crunch the calculations of quantum chromodynamics. Now, that is the theory of fundamental particles called quarks, the building blocks of protons and neutrons, and how they interact with each other through gluons.
What you're looking at here is the energy density of the gluon field fluctuations. Where the little red spots come out, the energy density is very high, and it fades down through the colors. And the lowest energy field fluctuations are not rendering this animation so that we can actually see into it.
And what we see is a bubbling soup of quantum field fluctuations that come and go incredibly quickly. The frame rate of this simulation is 1,000,000 billion frames per second. Now that is truly high speed. The dimensions of this box are absolutely tiny. They are millionths of a billionth of a meter, roughly enough space to stick 2 protons. But there are no protons here. This is a simulation of the vacuum on its own, what we normally think of as empty space.
Empty space is actually full of these quark and gluon field fluctuations. And on average, it is possible to annihilate a quark from empty space because it's not empty.
That just sounds like the most ridiculous idea, that you're meant to have empty space, and yet you can go and get rid of stuff from it.
That's right. So it isn't empty.
Now, it seems counterintuitive that the vacuum at its lowest energy state should contain all of this stuff. But in fact, to clear out the fluctuations and create a truly empty vacuum would require a lot of energy.
The empty vacuum actually costs an enormous amount of energy to create. And if you were able to create it, you'd discover that that is actually unstable, that any sort of perturbation would push that empty vacuum into something where the vacuum's actually full of quantum field fluctuations.
Well, this may not be as strange as it first appears. I mean, consider a permanent magnet. It has a magnetic field around it at low energy, at room temperature. And that's because the individual little magnetic moments of all the atoms inside are lined up. But if you were to heat it up, you would give thermal energy to all those particles, and at a certain point, called the Curie temperature, they would be so randomly aligned that there would no longer be an overall magnetic field. So it actually takes energy to get rid of the permanent magnetic field. This is just like the quantum vacuum. And understanding how the quantum vacuum fluctuations work gives us a sense of what the fundamental particles do, like where are you most likely to find a quark?
And it turns out that the quark likes to sit on top of those lumps. Now those lumps come into and out of existence fairly quickly, and so we like to think of the quarks as hopping from one lump over to the next lump as it appears, and then on to another one. I like to think of it as a hiker trying to cross a stream that's running around, and every now and then a stone pops up, because the water's swirled around it, so you put your foot there and then you look for the next spot, and if you go quickly enough you might not get your feet wet. So I think quarks are very much doing, well, we know quarks are very much doing the same thing.
So while it is true that you and I and all of the other atoms in the universe are mostly empty space, it is also true that empty space isn't truly empty. And in fact, it is these vacuum fluctuations which are essential for our existence.
Anyways, there's a lot of speculation in all these discoveries because they're trying to interpret data. So anyways, the person at the end is saying, oh, this is the reason for our existence. I wouldn't know, maybe, yes, okay. But the field is apparently what allows the particles to move around and fluctuate. So the field might be the source of all of them to manifest, and then would be the implicate order from Bohm. The underlying energetic foundation for everything in the explicate order that we live in to manifest from. But even in the lower orders of atomic and subatomic particles, there's fields themselves which might be responsible for the movement and flux of electrons and other subatomic particles or atomic particles or atoms themselves. Anyways, just the point is that even in empty space, people say there's empty space, but even that empty space isn't empty, and it's just a different type of energy, it's a different vibratory field. Anyways, it's all complex stuff. There's always stuff that we don't. The point is that there's stuff that we don't see that we can detect through other technology that allows us to say, well, it looks like there's something else here that we can't detect, but the technology, the machine can. So, anyways, just to demonstrate that our senses can be very limiting. We can discover things where there appear to be nothing. We cannot see any of these fields or subatomic particles. They can only be detected with sensors of various kinds that feed us data to present what it looks like. The smallest we can view atoms is at, the smallest we can view atoms at is as a whole with the surrounding electron cloud. To view inside an atom requires experiments other than just an ability to zoom in, like was done in the Zoom into Steel video. Perception through the five senses does not necessitate a full explanation and understanding of reality. It is practical to use, but not to fool ourselves into blindly following the dictates of our senses for the choices and decisions in our lives. We should endeavor to align our perceptions with reality and see things as they are, to then be in a position of greater awareness and realization to choose a more correct path. Attachment to perception as the defining characteristic in reality can limit our possibilities. Restricting our imagination to our current perceptions limits our potential for different choices. All matter is energy in motion at the quantum level. Various states of motion can be expressed as a frequency oscillation and vibration. Similar to zooming into steel, we can create a representation of zooming in from the macro into the micro, from the largest scales to the smallest we know of. The universe is an amazing place. And here will be two videos. Cosmic Voyage Zoom In, and also an old video from 1977, The Powers of 10. And this is just going in scale from 10 to the power of 1, or 10 to the power of 45 down to the 10 to the power of minus 45. So the macro to the micro. So here are those two videos. They are pretty amazing.
The picnic near the lakeside in Chicago is the start of a lazy afternoon, early one October. We begin with a scene 1 meter wide, which we view from just 1 meter away. Now, every 10 seconds, we will look from 10 times farther away, and our field of view will be 10 times wider. This square is 10 meters wide, and in 10 seconds, the next square will be 10 times as wide. Our picture will center on the picnickers, even after they've been lost to sight. 100 meters wide. The distance a man can run in 10 seconds. Cars crowd the highway. Power boats lie at their docks. The colorful bleachers are Soldiers Field. This square is 1 kilometer wide, 1,000 meters. The distance a racing car can travel in 10 seconds. We see the great city on the lake shore. 10 to the 4th meters, 10 kilometers. The distance a supersonic airplane can travel in 10 seconds. We see first the rounded end of Lake Michigan, then the whole Great Lake. 10 to the 5th meters, the distance an orbiting satellite covers in 10 seconds. Long parades of clouds, the day's weather in the Middle West. 10 to the 6th, a 1 with 6 zeros, 1 million meters. Soon the Earth will show as a solid sphere. We are able to see the whole Earth now, just over a minute along the journey. The Earth diminishes into the distance, but those background stars are so much farther away that they do not yet appear to move. A line extends at the true speed of light. In 1 second, it half crosses the tilted orbit of the moon. Now we mark a small part of the path in which the Earth moves about the sun. Now the orbital paths of the neighbor planets, Venus and Mars, then Mercury. Entering our field of view is the glowing center of our solar system, the sun, followed by the massive outer planets, swinging wide in their big orbits. That odd orbit belongs to Pluto. A fringe of a myriad comets too faint to see completes the solar system. Ten to the 14th. As the solar system shrinks to one bright point in the distance, our sun is plainly now only one among the stars. Looking back from here, we note 4 southern constellations, still much as they appear from the far side of the Earth. This square is 10 to the 16th meters, 1 light year, not yet out to the next star. Our last 10-second step took us 10 light years further. The next will be 100. Our perspective changes so much in each step now that even the background stars will appear to converge. At last, we pass the bright star Arcturus and some stars of the Dipper. Normal but quite unfamiliar stars and clouds of gas surround us as we traverse the Milky Way galaxy. Giant steps carry us into the outskirts of the galaxy. And as we pull away, we begin to see the great flat spiral facing us. The time and path we chose to leave Chicago has brought us out of the galaxy along a course nearly perpendicular to its disk. The 2 little satellite galaxies of our own are the clouds of Magellan. 10 to the 22nd power, 1 million light years. Groups of galaxies bring a new level of structure to the scene. Glowing points are no longer single stars, but whole galaxies of stars seen as one. We pass the big Virgo cluster of galaxies among many others, 100 million light years out. As we approach the limit of our vision, we pause to start back home. This lonely scene, the galaxies like dust, is what most of space looks like. This emptiness is normal. The richness of our own neighborhood is the exception. The trip back to the picnic on the lakefront will be a sped-up version, reducing the distance to the Earth's surface by 1 power of 10 every 2 seconds. In each 2 seconds, we will appear to cover 90% of the remaining distance back to Earth. Notice the alternation between great activity and relative inactivity, a rhythm that will continue all the way into our next goal, a proton in the nucleus of a carbon atom beneath the skin on the hand of the sleeping man at the picnic. Ten to the 9th meters, 10 to the 8th, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are back at our starting point. We slow up at 1 meter, 10 to the 0 power. Now we reduce the distance to our final destination by 90% every 10 seconds, each step much smaller than the one before. At 10 to the minus 2, 1/100th of a meter, 1 centimeter, we approach the surface of the hand. In a few seconds, we'll be entering the skin, crossing layer after layer from the outermost dead cells into a tiny blood vessel within. Skin layers vanish in turn. An outer layer of cells, felty collagen. The capillary containing red blood cells and a roughly lymphocyte. We enter the white cell. Among its vital organelles, the porous wall of the cell nucleus appears. The nucleus within holds the heredity of the man in the coiled coils of DNA. As we close in, we come to the double helix itself, a molecule like a long twisted ladder whose rungs of paired bases spell out twice, in an alphabet of 4 letters, the words of the powerful genetic message. At the atomic scale, the interplay of form and motion becomes more visible. We focus on one commonplace group of 3 hydrogen atoms bonded by electrical forces to a carbon atom. 4 electrons make up the outer shell of the carbon itself. They appear in quantum motion as a swarm of shimmering points. At 10 to the minus 10 meters, 1 angstrom, we find ourselves right among those outer electrons. Now we come upon the 2 inner electrons held in a tighter swarm. As we draw toward the atom's attracting center, we enter upon a vast inner space. At last, the carbon nucleus, so massive and so small. This carbon nucleus is made up of 6 protons and 6 neutrons. We are in the domain of universal modules. There are protons and neutrons in every nucleus, electrons in every atom, atoms bonded into every molecule out to the farthest galaxy. As a single proton fills our scene, we reach the edge of present understanding. Are these some quarks at intense interaction? Our journey has taken us through 40 powers of 10. If now the field is 1 unit, then when we saw many clusters of galaxies together, it was 10 to the 40th, or 1 and 40 zeros.
Well, that was amazing. There are many examples around us to illustrate how solidity can come from oscillating objects. A fan has gaps between its blades but gives the effect of being solid if one were to try to shoot a ball through. A spinning tire hubcap can seem to be stationary or moving backwards due to the specific rotational speed it has. A guitar string appears to be in many places at once when struck. Spinning anything at a high enough velocity will produce the appearance of solidity. And I'd also like to mention that in order to produce the appearance of solidity, you first have to have something solid that is moving and then produces a secondary state of apparent solidity, an illusory solidity. But there's always, in order to produce that oscillation and speed to seemingly occupy in a limited frame of time one area of space, so like a fan blade, there's 3 things that actually exist and then there's space in between. But because the oscillation is so quick that within a time frame such as 1 second or 1/25th of a second, the frame of our minds, our eyes, we still see it as a solid thing or as nothing there, depending on the gaps. If there's more gaps, then we're going to see that there's nothing there. It won't even appear solid. We won't even see the 3 blades. But if there's more something and there is nothing, then it looks like it's one solid thing. But the point is, in order to create the illusion of solidity, you still have the thing that's solid, that's oscillating, that creates the illusion of solidity. I just want to mention that. To continue, the frequency and energy seems to be directly proportional to something's scale, size, or mass. The quantum level has a higher frequency than higher scaled objects in universe. Gamma and X-rays are smaller than visible light or radio frequencies and have more energy and a higher frequency. Subatomic particles are extremely small, yet very heavy and high energy. So essentially, the bigger the size, the more mass, and the less speed it can attain because it's at a lower frequency. The smaller micro scale has higher frequency and it can go faster. This relates to the double slit experiment, which I'm about to get into it. The reason that quantum mechanics applies to the micro scale and not the macro scale is because of this. Because the smaller things are at a higher frequency and they can travel faster because of their relatively lower mass for their size. You can't do a double slit experiment with a human or a rock because we cannot get that scale and that mass, that size to a high enough speed because it's such a low frequency object. You cannot produce the quantum weirdness. You cannot create the double slit experiment. If by somehow you could get us to move relatively at the same speed, you could get a rock to move at the relative same speed, relatively in terms of the electron and its size and the speed required to make the double slit experiment, and then the rock and the speed and the size to make that relatively the same in terms of its own dimensions of scale as the electron or the buckyball or the fullerene, then you could potentially have the rock display the same effects as photons or electrons or fullerenes. But at a certain point, there's a limitation in the experiment you can produce because the size and the mass lowers the vibrational frequency, and you would need to get it to go so fast in order to reproduce the effects that you see at the micro level of a smaller scale, smaller mass, and higher frequency of vibration. So I hope this makes sense to people. Just explaining how the reality works, how the quantum experiment works, and why you can't do it at a larger scale, and how this relates to size and mass and their frequency. Another way of understanding how the small parts create bigger parts and appears to be one solid piece is by thinking of a net or screen. If you weave small enough, the spaces or holes seem to disappear, and you have a thin sheet that can hold substances. So if you think of a sheet, 300 thread count, well, it'll be able to hold stuff. If you have a sheet that's only a 1 inch count, or whatever, like a cheesecloth, well, if you put, something could fall through the cheesecloth because the thread count isn't high. But if you have something with a very tightly knit thread count, then it can hold substances. So if we look at a net, if you look from far away, depending on the spacing in the net on the thread count, it can look solid because they're so close together. You take a sheet, you look at it from far away, well, it looks solid. And if you had a smaller thread count or a bigger thread count, depending on how you want to look at it, let's say you only had 10 threads per inch, well, then it would look less solid. If you look at it from far away, you'd be able to see things maybe through it, see a lot of light, etc. But if you go even in the one from far away that looks solid, if you look close enough, you can see space. You get close enough, you can see between the thread count, and you can see space and light between behind it and things like that. So atoms have space around and inside them, but different forces act to keep various pieces attached or repelled. Solidity is created because the space is too small relative to other components engaged with various forces energies for the space to be a problem. So if there were, what I'm saying is, if there were no forces acting on each other, on other aspects or on each other in order to create the strong force, let's say, that holds things together, if there were no force, then there would be nothing holding it together, and there would be no atoms, and there would be nothing in existence. So the space isn't even an issue when you have the force in there. The force is what the force and energy links relative components and continues in larger scales, and then eventually you have the degradation of the quantum world, and you have the physical macro world properties emerge, and you can't reproduce the quantum weirdness anymore, as I've been explaining. At a certain point, you lose that ability. And the space, people want to talk about space, well, it doesn't really matter. Oh, everything's space. So what if there's space? It doesn't matter. The interaction of the particles, such as electrons, protons, and neutrons, within the forces creates solidity. So you have all the electrons popping in and out of existence. You still couldn't put your hand through an atom. Let's say you could, let's say we were small enough to do that or whatever. The electrons go in and out of existence. They do create a shell. It's just it's so fast, everything's popping in and out of existence so fast for us, it looks like one shell. So no, you could not put your hand through it because it would be like a shell, like an egg, like a golf ball. You couldn't put your hand through it because it would be solid. And just like you take all those atoms together and you arrange them in a grid to form steel, yeah, there's space between those atoms too. But it doesn't matter. There's a force that actually attracts those atoms together in order to make something super damn strong like steel. You're going to tell me steel is weak? Give me a break. We'll learn about reality. It doesn't matter if there's space between the atoms. There's other things, which is the video above. There's empty space is not empty. There's forces going on. There's forces that hold the particles together. So even if you have 99.99% space, so what? There's still solidity that is created. Big deal. You're going to try to deny reality that there's space, everything's space, therefore, oh my god, everything's space, there's nothing solid. I don't know how people can think these things. It's stupidity. Learn terms, learn words, learn reality. I don't understand. Like, go learn for yourself, think for yourself. No wonder people believe in all this fantasy and new age bullshit and pseudo-spiritual nonsense, Eastern religious puffery, feel-good crap, all these things to manipulate your mind. There's no solidity, it's all an illusion. No, you don't understand. You do not understand how it works. Go educate yourself. I did. I wrote this big article. I spent hours of research into the double slit. I've only found a few people, mostly they're academics. Most people in the truther community who've come across the double slit experiment buy into all the hogwash by all the fraudulent physicists and people who can't interpret data correctly and want to spin their own speculative interpretations as if it was the actual way reality works. And people just gobble these interpretations up and they don't even go look into things themselves. I figured it out. All it takes is an inquiring mind. You know, the information's out there. Other people, apparently, even in the academics, aren't intelligent enough. You know why they're not intelligent enough? Because they don't have enough understanding of reality, because they're stuck in the 5 sense illusion, where they can't think into the imaginative spheres and other possibilities to understand how things connect and correlate in greater capacities. They're stuck in limited views, so they have their data, but they can't figure it out properly. They can't correlate it. Anyways, I'll be getting more into that. So I've dispelled some misconceptions people have about how reality functions. I've already been explaining how electrons form, and they do form a solid shell. It's not solid in terms of their experience of popping in and out of existence, which we don't do. We don't pop in and out of existence. With things at a smaller scale, getting closer to the original one-all field energy, which permeates even in the space between these particles. It's always there, holding them together. But then they build up when the atoms hold together and they form bigger structures. And you have the carbon-based life forms like us, and then you have bigger structures, and it's all greater complexity and emergent phenomenon, emergent properties. And the correlations of different aspects of reality with other aspects of reality keep things in a localized, solid reality rather than a quantum reality. If they were all separate and disconnected and non-localized, well then they would all be operating in terms of quantum rules instead of our rules of the larger reality. Another way of understanding how the small... Oh, I already read that. Okay, yeah. So we're on to the next section, which is the double slit experiment. If you are not familiar with the double slit experiment, please watch a brief introduction below to get a general understanding. I recommend taking the time necessary, days or weeks, and investigate this complex and fascinating subject on your own to make sure you understand what is being said in this article, in my article. Not what is being said in the videos, because they use rhetoric and they convince you of things with their visual demonstrations, and they tell you this is what's happening and that's the way it is. But you have to actually be curious, doubt, question what is said, question yourself, and go look into things. It took me a while, but I did, because I kept thinking about coming back to it and thinking about it, and I'm like, no, this doesn't make sense. My intuition was telling me something doesn't make sense. So I went and looked into it, and sure enough, I figured out what didn't make sense, and I resolved how to make more sense of these experiments and the data to understand how reality is constructed and functions more correctly.
And here we are, the granddaddy of all quantum weirdness, the infamous double slit experiment. To understand this experiment, we first need to see how particles, or little balls of matter, act. If we randomly shoot a small object, say a marble, at the screen, we see a pattern on the back wall where they went through the slit and hit. Now, if we add a second slit, we would expect to see a second band duplicated to the right. Now, let's look at waves. The waves hit the slit and radiate out, striking the back wall with the most intensity directly in line with the slit. The line of brightness on the back screen shows that intensity. This is similar to the line the marbles make. But when we add the second slit, something different happens. If the top of one wave meets the bottom of another wave, they cancel each other out. So now there is an interference pattern on the back wall. Places where the two tops meet are the highest intensity, the bright lines, and where they cancel, there is nothing. So, when we throw things, that is, matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. it behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through 2 slits, we should get, like the marbles, 2 bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. But we get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So, they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits, and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one, and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of 2 bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both. The electron decided to act differently, as though it was aware it was being watched. And it was here that physicists stepped forever into the strange, never world of quantum events. What is matter? Marbles or waves? And waves of what? And what does an observer have to do with any of this? The observer collapsed the wave function simply by observing.
What is light?
What is light? What is light? That's a good question, isn't it? What is light?
Isn't it an element?
Light is brightness, I guess.
We have auras.
We all have auras.
Which are light?
Yes, they are.
It lights up the room. It makes it not dark.
What's the difference between blue light and red light?
The colour.
It goes in your eyes and then you see stuff.
They range from white to red to orange to green. It's like the chakras of your body.
Can you see my aura?
No, not particularly right now.
Is it too bright out?
It's very sunny out here today.
Does that make it harder to see someone's aura?
Not necessarily.
If I was to explain it to a blind person, right,
yeah.
it would be the difference. You see nothing whatsoever as a blind person, whereas I see things in front of me.
To be fair, the question of what light is not an easy one. For centuries, the greatest minds in science debated this issue. In the late 1600s, Newton proposed that light was a stream of particles, or corpuscles. He proposed this in his treatise Optics. But at the same time, a Dutch physicist named Huygens proposed that light was a wave. And this debate raged on until it was settled by the experiment I've recreated today, Thomas Young's double-slit experiment. To make sure I got the experiment right, I went to the original source. With the help of Brady Heron, I managed to get into the vault underneath the Royal Society in London. There I found Thomas Young's handwritten notes from 1803.
I brought into the sunbeam a slip of a card, about 1/30th of an inch in breadth, and observed its shadow, either on the wall or on other cards held at different distances. Besides the fringes of colors on each side of the shadow itself was divided by similar parallel fringes.
Smaller dimensions. Wow.
This is an experiment so simple that you could make it at home, and yet so fiddly that I have never seen it before done with sunlight.
I was thinking about doing it in a box, like a fridge box.
And you could take it out on the street.
Taking it out on the street.
Could I possibly interview you guys for about a minute? We're doing a science experiment. What I have here is an empty box. And this is a little eyepiece where we can look in, and this is a hole. And I'm gonna place this slide above that hole. And if you look closely, you'll see that there's two openings. Very narrow openings side by side. It's a double slit. Now before we have a look, we need to tilt it towards the sun a little bit. So we want the sun to hit this double slit directly. What are we going to see on the bottom of the box?
The obvious thing you think you're going to see is you're going to see two lines.
2 lines on the bottom of the box. 2 bright bands.
2 little lines.
Yeah. I think it'll be one line instead of 2.
I could expect to see the whole box lit up.
It'll probably be a kaleidoscope of some sort.
A bunch of colors.
Probably, yeah.
Rainbow, different colours.
There, have a look. You expected to see kind of one line. Is that what you see?
No.
I see dots.
How many?
It's one circle.
Well, there's one in the middle strongest, 2 either side.
The 2 on the outside are multicolored, and the one in the middle is just white.
And kind of a rainbow?
The rainbow of colour as well.
Quite a few colours and lots of little dots.
Like there are more dots appearing.
I think I can even see more dots spreading along. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I can see tons of dots now. Not tons, but I can see dots spreading across that way.
Either side.
Yeah, definitely.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's just nothing else apart from
2 slits.
2 slits. That's incredible.
But all we're doing is we're putting a light through 2 very narrow slits side by side. So how does this make any sense?
There's some kind of principle involved there that the average person is not familiar with. That's the only explanation.
No, I'm really confused by it, but I'd like to find out why.
People were debating, is light a wave or is it made of particles?
So what causes that?
Well, if light were behaving as particles, you would expect them to go through each slit and just produce a bright spot underneath. So we would see 2 bright spots on the bottom of the box. But if light's behaving as waves, then the wave from one slit can interact with the waves from the other slit. I've got a demonstration here on a little pond where we can see this with water waves. I have 2 sources of ripples, which are basically like the 2 slits. When I create ripples with a single source, they travel out with circular wavefronts. Nothing particularly surprising there. But if I add a second source of ripples, then we start getting an interesting pattern. This pattern is created by the ripples from the 2 sources interacting with each other. Where they meet up peaks with peaks and troughs with troughs, the amplitude of the wave is increased. That's what we call constructive interference. But if the peak from one wave meets up with the trough from the other, then we get destructive interference and there's basically no wave there. And this is exactly what was happening with the light. When the light from one slit met up peaks with peaks and troughs with troughs, they constructively interfered and produced a bright spot. But if the trough from the wave from one slit met up with the peak of the wave from the other slit, they would destructively interfere and you wouldn't see any light there. It's light cancelling itself out.
This is basically the same as like having 2 drops of water fall in a swimming pool.
That's right.
Get exactly the same
and then
pattern.
They go and overlap. As this ripple overlaps with those ripples, down the bottom, you get a series of, you get like a bright spot, and then a dark spot, and then a bright spot, then a dark spot, then a bright spot. Now there's a slight complication, which is that sunlight is composed of many different colors, and they have different wavelengths. So obviously they're going to meet up at slightly different points. And that's what caused the rainbowing effects as we go further from the central maximum. You saw the ones to the right were slightly colored.
Yeah,
that's because
burgundy.
the reds are going to meet up at different places than the blues.
And that's all that makes the colour differences, is different wavelengths.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
So the difference between red and
so
blue...
that red bin over there and the green part are just, I'm seeing
It's
that,
a
and
different-
it's just different
different
wavelengths. And that's how we bring in all these beautiful colours all around us.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I'm amazed. Oh, good on you. Thanks, Ben.
Hey, thank you.
I have been enlightened, literally.
Now, you may have noticed in that experiment that the light on the bottom of the box was not in the shape of slits. Rather, they were more kind of round blobs. And I want to know why that is. Can you write an answer for me in the comment section? And I'll give you a hint. One of the videos I've linked kind of is suggestive of the answer. So convincing were the results of Young's double-slit experiment that the scientific community concluded that light must be a wave. There is no way it could be a particle.
The first ever double-slit experiment was conducted by passing light through a single slit to produce a single line when the light hits the wall. Adding another slit, we would expect there to be two lines on the wall to represent two slits that light passes through. Instead of seeing two lines, there is a diffraction interference pattern similar to what is produced with waves. Small parts of matter exhibit characteristics of larger substances, particles, at some times, and that of wave-like properties at other times. The big thing about the double-slit experiment is the effect of detecting the path the object takes through the two slits. When no detection is made as to which slit is used, the interference pattern emerges on the detector screen. When a detector is placed at a slit to determine the path taken, the interference pattern goes away, and the buildup is that of two lines instead of an interference. There are two different ways for the double slit experiment to be conducted to produce the interference or diffraction pattern. Photons, electrons, and other methods can be used to show a diffraction pattern and remove it when interaction with some other part of the universe acts as an observer. The experiment produces certain results. Those results are interpreted and conclusions are drawn about them. Concluding matter behaves as particles to be solid when there is someone watching, and behaves like waves of potential that are not solid when there is no one watching, when there is no human consciousness, is one interpretation promoted by New Age type thinking. But there are more interpretations. So I just want to say, even though this podcast is, even though this article and the audio I am doing is based in part on Mark Passio's information, clearly you can see how the information I'm presenting is not the same as what Mark Passio presents in his podcast, podcast number 7 or something. I took what he did, but I'm doing more. And this is what I'm talking about. In those earlier presentations, I believe Mark Passio was more influenced by New Age material than he currently is. I know I was more back then than I currently am. And he even promoted or said he doesn't agree with everything they say, but people should take a look at them. People such as Greg Braden and Wayne Dyer and other things, Neil Donald Walsh and The Conversation with God, all those things. I don't think Mark would promote any of those people right now, but at the time, in earlier podcasts, he did. He also said things like human consciousness is the reason for... Well, he didn't say human consciousness. He said consciousness is what makes things solid. So I don't know if he meant human consciousness. I think he's since maybe changed his mind rather than these New Age notions, or maybe he still believes in them. He doesn't really talk about it anymore. But I'm making the case that that is wrong. That if you're concluding that particles are solid because someone's watching, and then if you don't watch, then the particles are going to be waves again because there's no human consciousness watching, and I really don't think this is what Mark is saying at all. I'm not saying that that's what he's saying. But in the earlier podcast, he said that consciousness was responsible for this. And I would say, I think I mentioned it later in my article, that if you want to look at consciousness as any part of anything that exists in the universe, as an electron, a proton, a neutron, maybe even a quark, maybe even any of the subatomic particles, maybe those are consciousness as well. Then I would say, yeah, okay. Then it does work in terms of particle and wave duality with respect to consciousness. as you do require other aspects of reality in order to manifest the physical, tangible reality we exist in. Because if things weren't corresponded and correlated, you would not have the buildup of reality we have now. Things not correlating and not corresponding and not interconnecting would just be everything apart from itself. So everything would just be electrons and protons and neutrons just flying around everywhere. They wouldn't be coalesced and interacting according to the forces and fields and energy of more basic substrata of how our reality is created in the implicate order. You would just have everything just all scattered about in entropy and death. There would be nothing in stagnation. When things come together and build greater complexity, then you have emergent phenomenon, and that's where I would say, yeah, okay, all those little pieces coming together, they're aspects of consciousness correlating with different aspects of consciousness, and that creates reality, it creates the particles, sure. But if you're going to say it's human consciousness, wrong, wrong, wrong. Completely wrong. All you have to do is go look into information. Go think for yourself. Stop accepting these fantasy beliefs other people tell you, and go look into the double slit experiment from A to Z. How did it get created? Where did the electron come from? Anyone ever think of this? When you're looking at the double slit, oh, there's an electron gun. Well, did you ever think of where the electron gun, how the electron gun works? Where does the electron come from? Well, it comes from the electron gun. Yeah, but where does that electron come from? How come you never looked into understanding this? Yet you're going to believe everything that people tell you about the results of the double slit experiment, even though you don't even understand how the electron was generated in the first place? You're not going to understand different experiments. You're not going to look into quantum erasure yourself. You're just going to believe people like Thomas Campbell who say quantum erasure proves that we can retroactively change reality even after it occurred. No, that's not what quantum erasure proves. See, he's a physicist and he's lying about what these things say. Go look into it yourself. Think for yourself. Read yourself. I'm presenting what I figured out. And it sure as hell isn't what all the pseudo-spiritualists and all the New Agers and all the frauds and all the unthinking people, all the posers and pretenders who want to pretend that they understand what quantum mechanics says and quantum physics says. Even in the equation, I even looked at the equation. I understood how it worked at a quantum level. I even understood how it doesn't work at a macro level. Now, I didn't write notes on this at the time, but I should have. But that was just for me proving it to myself. I wasn't out to prove it to other people. Eventually, I made it into an article and things, but I prove things to myself. I want to know truth. I want to be right to know what is right. I don't want to spurt bullshit interpretations of quantum mechanics by people who didn't know how to interpret and understand reality correctly. I want to know what is true. So I looked into the equation. You can get it on Wikipedia. You should be able to, well anyways, I'm not sure you'll be able to figure out completely. I understood what the equation was doing. And I also understood how it doesn't apply at a bigger level because it's about probability. See, quantum mechanics and quantum physics has to do with probable states. Because there's a problem in measurement where if you measure something's location, you can't know its speed, its velocity. If you measure something's velocity, you can't know where it is, its position. And this is known as, I forget, there's a term for it. It's the measurement problem or something, quantum measurement problem. Anyways, it's the whole problem of measurement, and that's how they can calculate things is with this equation. But in understanding that equation, you can also see how it doesn't apply on the larger scale because it deals with probability. Now these probabilities deal with the smaller things and at their level of reality and existence. Now as you coordinate components and bring them together and join them, and they become joined by forces and energies and fields that keep them together, and then they create greater complexity and greater complexity and greater complexity, and as this complexity evolves, the probabilities for these quantum weirdness to take effect are reduced. The probability gets reduced to such a great extent when we get to our level of functionality at 10 to the power of 1 as opposed to 10 to the power of minus 4, minus 10, I don't know what they are. But the smaller you go, the more the quantum effects apply, and then the bigger you go, the more the reality effects, the manifested reality effects apply, and the quantum stuff will never happen. It'll only happen, you know, the probability is so low. When it's in the micro world, the probability is higher because things actually operate that way in the micro world. In the macro world, things don't operate the way they do in the quantum world. You know, all you need is reality. People have been fighting over this for so long in conceptual bullshit. All you need is your mind. Understand what happens in the quantum world. Okay, all this weird shit. And then you look at our world, where we live. Do we live as a proton, as an electron, as a neutron? No. Do we even live as an atom? Do we live as a molecule? You know, do we live as a DNA? Do we live as a molecule? Do we even live as a cell? No, we don't live in any of those realities. Wake up. We live in this larger reality. Okay? We don't live in those smaller ones. So whatever rules apply there, they don't apply in blind correspondence to our reality. Wake up. Our reality has certain rules, and the quantum reality has certain rules. Now, quantum reality does apply here. The mathematical rules still apply. But when you do the math in the quantum world, you'll have things that actually occur. And when you do the math in the macro world, in the non-quantum world, guess what happens? The probability is not there. The probability is so low that the things that happen in the quantum world will only happen once in every 200 billion years in 1 in 200 billion universes or something. So ridiculous that it'll never happen. No one will ever experience the quantum weirdness in our macro reality because the probability of it occurring, according to the math of quantum physics, is non-existent virtually. Now, I'm just talking about in the math, in the quantum physics equations, why people say that, oh, well, the same thing that happens in the quantum world happens in our world because it's there according to the math. The math proves it. It applies in all worlds. Yes, it does prove, but you don't understand what the math is saying. It is talking about probabilities. The same probabilities do not apply in the quantum world as they do in the macro world. The probabilities are immensely different. Does that mean the probabilities still cannot be calculated according to these equations, which work in verifiable capacities for the quantum world? No, they do work, and they are verifiable in the quantum world. And they work in the big world, in the macro world, because they'll never actually happen in the macro world. So you'll never verify them here, but according to the equation, it all makes sense. The quantum world works this way, according to the equations, and everything fits well. But people don't look into things themselves. They don't look into the equation to see how it works and how it's actually all probability. The probability of the electron going from the electron gun as a particle into one of the two slits or both slits or whatever as a wave, because it hasn't been collapsed as a particle, it goes through and it hits the screen in a particular place. It only hits it in one place. It doesn't hit it in many places, which is another misconception people have. People think, oh, well, it's going through both slits as a wave, so it's making 2 dots on the screen. No, it only makes 1 dot on the screen. It's just the dot on the screen after you do 1,000,000 runs, then you see an interference pattern where the dots don't go. It's not that 2 dots hit the screen at the same time, that the wave goes through the 2 slots and then it impacts the screen in 2 places. No. It's that the probability of the wave collapsing into a particle on a specific location is in accordance with the quantum mechanics, the equations of quantum mechanics, and that it will probabilistically impact in certain zones within the interference pattern, but you still see some in the interference pattern where there's not supposed to be some. It's because it's not where there's none. It's a probability curve, okay? It's not exact, it's not a precise point. That's why you have, it looks like a wave, because you have certain points where there's a higher concentration, and then as you go down in the wave, you'll have points where there's only a few little dots on the screen. And then you'll go back up in the wave and there'll be more, because the probability curve was low, where there's probably not going to be some, and then the probability was high where there's supposed to be some. So that's why you have a probabilistic concentration of impact points on the screen in the double slit experiment in one location, or in various locations that are separated by relatively low impact zones, because we're dealing with probabilities. It's always going to land here, here, and here. No, it doesn't always land here, here, and here. It's probabilistic in a wave that it lands here, here, and here, and it's distributed. It's a distributed wave function. I don't remember what I was getting at with this, but that's more details on the the double slit experiment. Oh yes, that it's a probability that it'll impact that way. But when you actually manifest the particle, see, once the particle hit the screen, it's not going to become a wave again. And just like when you detect it through the slit, well, it's become a particle, and it hits the screen where it was supposed to hit according to a linear trajectory, and it doesn't follow the wave probabilistic curve. You see, it's not actually a wave. That's just our way of conceiving of these things, of these experiments, and trying to relate it in terms we know. So we call one a particle because it appears solid. We call one a wave because it appears to act in the same behavior as a wave. If you put water and you have two slits and the wave goes through the water, well, it'll impact in two places because the wave goes through the slits and becomes two different waves. And then as these two different waves propagate forward, eventually these two waves, which was originally one wave sent out that hit two slits that became two waves, these two waves interfere with each other, and where the interference happens is where you're not going to have an impact on the screen, which translates into less impact zones in the double slit experiment, and where the wave doesn't interfere, where the two waves don't interfere with each other, that impact zone will continue to hit the wall where the wave is detected, or in the double slit experiment, that lack of interference will result in the probability of the electron hitting the screen in a particular place, as opposed to where it probably won't hit, less probably won't hit, which would be the interference zone. Now, if you look at the double slit images, you'll see that even in the interference zones, there are still particles hitting. That's because it's a probabilistic curve. The probability is that it will hit certain areas, but it'll still go into the interference zone because it's not a negation zone. It's probabilistically interferent. So it's all probabilities. That's why you don't have them hitting the same place. So when you relate that to the macro world, it's the probabilities that these weird things happen is so small that it'll never happen. So go look into it yourself. That's enough for my rant there. If you don't understand it, really just go look into it yourself. Take hours. Oh, hours. Joke. Take days and weeks to look into it. Okay, even all the research that I got, I haven't even read it all. You don't need to. You ask questions, look for an answer. If you can't find an answer, ask a different question. Find research, read only the things you need to read. A 6-page or 20-page thing, skim through it, do a Control F, find the things that you're looking for, and then keep going from there. That's how I figured it out. It's one step at a time. At a certain point, I thought, where does the electron come from? And then I had to go figure out, where does the electron come from? Rather than just, oh, well, there's an electron. Well, how does it happen? Because then you figure out, how does the electron go from a state of attachment to an actual atom to being detached as a free electron and exhibiting wave properties? How does it go from how does it become a wave when it was already a particle? And the whole argument is about how that wave, how what's originally a particle exhibits properties of a wave before it impacts the screen and becomes a particle again. Because they assume that when they launch it from the gun, oh, well, it's a particle. We're launching an electron particle. And then, oh, well, it's somehow becoming a wave. And then, oh, it somehow becomes a particle again when it impacts. And if we put a detector, well, it doesn't behave like a wave before it impacts in the probabilistic curve. It just behaves like a particle sent from the gun in a straight line, because we detected it at the screen. But if we don't detect it at the screen, then it waits for actual something to come into contact with it, which is the screen. Then the probabilistic curve collapses into the point of probability in that space-time, location, whatever. And maybe it goes into the interference zone, maybe it stays into the probabilistic curve, whatever. It impacts, and it's no longer a probabilistic wave at that point. It's actually impacted with something in reality, an aspect of consciousness, as I was saying, something that's in reality. You can consider it consciousness, okay? That's part of the reality. And when it impacts that as a probabilistic curve, it becomes a particle as well, and poof, you see a spot on the screen. But prior to that impaction, it wasn't interacting with anything in reality as a consciousness in order to collapse the wave into a particle. It was just existing as a free particle. That's what the electron was. It was a free electron. When it was in the, I don't remember what the metal is, tungsten, or I have no clue. This was over a year ago. I don't remember. I could go look into it. They heat up something in the electron gun, just like they do in the cathode ray tubes for the TVs. This heats it up. The electron goes out of its shell, whatever, if it goes have to go through the first shell to the different valence to 2, 3. Eventually it pops out and it's a free electron. That's what I've understood. Maybe I'm wrong about all this. This is what I've understood. There's two electrons. There's the electrons that are bound to atoms, which create things in reality, and then there's free electrons, which aren't responsible for my cup or my keyboard. They're free. They're not bound. So when you heat things up, you create a free electron. So you unbound it from something in reality, which is what I'm talking about, consciousness, in this global sense, this bigger sense. I'm not talking about human consciousness or animal consciousness, okay? I'm talking about if you want to use the word consciousness to say that the wave particle collapsed when a detector was used because that's consciousness, and it was human consciousness that looked at the detector, or the wave collapsed into a particle when it hit the screen. Well, the point is it's coming into contact with something that exists. So the detector is something that exists, that's seeing it, or before, if something doesn't see it, then it hits the wall, and when it hits the wall, well, then it's coming into contact with something, and therefore it becomes something real. And the free electron, as a wave, will now becomes a particle electron which impacts the screen. Alright, so I think that's enough of a little rant tangent. We'll continue with the article. Some people may conclude that we need consciousness of humans in order for reality to exist, or our thoughts create reality directly through what we want or wish. And if we don't observe, then the particles that are manifest return to their waveform potential. But this is not so. It implies that when we are not looking at something as an observer, it reverts back to a state of potential. Hence, without conscious observation, the universe is not even solid, but only potential energy until someone looks at a particular part of the universe. I call New Age bullshit on this type of analysis. Anyone who promotes this type of analysis has not done an in-depth analysis in order to understand how reality operates. Yes, I am guilty of falling for this con game as well in my early days of looking into all this New Agery hocus-pocus information. But after some time of nagging doubts and curiosity, I actually did spend some time to look into it myself, and that's why I do call out this bullshit as bullshit. That if you don't look at something as an observer, because you're the all-powerful human consciousness that creates reality, right, in your delusional mind, that if you don't observe something, then it reverts from its collapsed particle state and becomes a wave potential again. Just non-existent until a human consciousness sets his amazingly powerful gaze upon the wave particle and it collapses again into a particle, no longer a wave potential, a wave particle potential, but now it collapses into a particle until you don't look at it again. And then it disappears into a wave potential. Amazing. Right? Oh yeah, humans are so powerful. We're so amazing. I'm a god. Wow, I feel so special. This is fantasy feel-good beliefs that make you feel good about your self-image, self-concept, and worldview. Your position in the universe. Oh my god, look how powerful I am. I just have to not look at things and they disappear. All we have to do as humans is not look at the negative and it'll disappear. There's so many idiotic, retarded, secondary belief constructs that will be accepted when you accept this new age, pseudo-spiritual, pseudo-science bullshit. You will become a total fool in your conception of how reality is constructed. You will be a fool. I still see it everywhere on the internet, on Facebook. Collective evolution is the biggest fraudulent group out there. They take garbage quotes. They don't just spread garbage quotes by accident. They take garbage quotes that they think in their deluded minds are actually representative, accurate understandings of reality. They're going to put their own logo on it, with their own colors and everything, recreate the whole quote so it has their collective evolution in their site and everything listed, and then they're going to spread that bullshit. Now, you're going to tell me that they didn't take the time to think? Probably not. Does that excuse what they did? No. They're just regurgitators of garbage information to make people feel good, to get likes, to get fans. They're not doing anything useful. They're just feeding garbage, low quality, feel good garbage into people's consciousness. And they get likes, they get followers. Is it going to help anybody? No. It'll make you feel good about yourself. So congratulations on your stress reduction. Yay, we'll grant you you have a reduced psycho pass today. You've engaged in stress reduction modalities to feel good about your miserable self. Congratulations. Why do you need this bullshit quantum quackery to feel good about yourself, about your position in the universe, about how special you are? None of this information brings you to actualize, realize, and individuate your real potential, your real value, and your real wealth. None of this does that. It keeps you away from the valuable occulted information on natural law, morality, and consciousness, how we function, what our motivations are, how to think properly, the trinity of consciousness. No, you're not going to get into any of that, because you're already feeling super good about yourself and how you're a god of the universe, creating reality through your vision. It's idiotic. It's not just that idiotic conclusion that people come up with. There's other derivations that aren't as stupid as the I create my reality, all based on delusional understandings of the double slit experiment. It's just ridiculous. The double slit experiment has created so many other belief systems. The whole we live in a hologram, which is based on the double slit, and the quantum erasure. Because I watched that holographic universe. At first, there was only 2 parts on YouTube, and then I found the other 3 parts on the person's site. That was like 2 years ago. But now I think all 5 parts are on YouTube. Anyways, I had so many problems just watching the first part that I couldn't bother going through all the rest. Because one of the claims they make is, it's not me saying this, it's all the physicists. And the guy who made the video brought up the quantum erasure experiment. And I was seeing inconsistencies in his premises and how he was concluding things, and therefore A, B, therefore C. there was errors in the way he was concluding things as matter of fact. And that's actually what started, well, I was actually thinking about it before that, but that helped me go into it more, and I have a bunch of stuff written out, a few pages on just that video and questions I had. But then I looked into quantum erasure, found out that the way they explain that is a lie as well. Anyways, lots of stuff to uncover. Everybody's lying to you about this double slit experiment. Everyone in the truth movement pretty much is lying to you. All the New Agers are lying to you, all the pseudo-spiritualists, all the pseudo-scientists. Science is probably the best way for you to go learn at people who did the experiment, go see how the experiment was created, how it functions, from step A to B, how it all works. Then you'll understand it more. I'd say stick to the scientists, even though they don't have as much of a correspondence capabilities and imagination to envision what the meanings of all these experiments mean. They stay within their own bubble. You can go outside of their bubble, but don't go into the bullshit bubble of other people's interpretations that they fed you. Make your own conclusions. Go look at the experiment from A to Z and think, what can you conclude from this information? Completely disregard all of the other 25 interpretations from Niels Bohr and Einstein, everybody. Ignore them all. Schrodinger, ignore it all. Go through the information and figure out what makes the most sense. Then you can see, oh well, this guy's interpretation was most accurate. Just go with what makes the most sense. Don't go with what some guy who discovered atoms said, or some famous guy. Who cares if they're famous? Think for yourself. Think for yourself. That's what I did. I figured out a lot that other people are not talking about because they don't think for themselves. They're not looking into this independently. I'm telling you, take some time, go look into it, everything, every aspect of it. If you're like, go work backwards. So the electron impacts the screen. Where does that electron come from? It comes from the gun. Well, how is the gun generated? Generating the electron. And then what happens? Well, where does the electron come from? How does it become one electron free? And what happens when it goes through the air? Why does it collapse? Why does it not collapse? Ask all these questions, find the answers. I've found a pretty cohesive understanding by looking into it myself. And it's not what scientists are saying, and it sure as hell isn't what the quacks are saying, the people who don't understand. It's maybe a co-joining of the two, I don't know. But you gotta look into things for yourself, and then they'll start to make more sense. It's just, this topic really, it's really ridiculous, and it's sad. Like, it upsets me whenever I see it on Facebook that people are so dumb that they just believe this shit. Anyways, I'll stop there. So here's just a quote from Wiki on the observer effect. In science, the term observer effect refers to changes that the act of observation will make on a phenomenon being observed. This is often the result of instruments that, by necessity, alter the state of what they measure in some manner. A commonplace example is checking the pressure in an automobile tire. This is difficult to do without letting out some of the air, thus changing the pressure. And that's what I was talking about the measurement problem before. This effect can be observed in many domains of physics. The observer effect on a physical process can often be reduced to insignificance by using better measurements, better instruments or observation techniques. However, in quantum mechanics, which deals with very small objects, it is not possible to observe a system without changing the system, so the observer must be considered part of the system being observed. I'd just like to mention what I was talking about earlier. Where you can't measure the velocity and know its position, or measure the position and know its velocity. Because what they're saying is in larger systems you can the amount of disturbance that you as part of the system cause within the system in order to measure the system can be insignificant, using better instruments and observation techniques to cause less disturbances. But when you're getting into things that are so small that the fact that you use a tool to get into that small reality, that smaller scale, the fact that you're into that smaller scale as a part of its system is going to alter the way that system operates, in a sense. So that it's impossible to observe a system without changing the system, because the observer is considered part of the system being observed. You can't remove yourself from it completely because you're in it, observing it. There's something you're using to record it, to measure it, so you're going to alter it in some way, or you're going to limit what you can know from it. An important aspect of the concept of measurement has been clarified in some quantum mechanical experiments where a single electron proved sufficient as an observer. There is no need for a conscious observer. That's my point. I'm talking about measurement and on human consciousness, is that if you want to consider anything such as an electron to be consciousness, then okay. That's how you want to define your term within this framework that we're looking at, this model we're looking at. Okay, if you want to define consciousness as anything in reality such as a single electron, okay. But it proves that there's no need for a conscious observer. There's no need for human consciousness. The observer effect does not depend on human consciousness. This clarifies things to the degree that we can understand a single electron as being an observer and could consider it a type of, quote, consciousness in some form that differentiates from our conception and definition of human consciousness. The concept of all is mind, all is mental, all is consciousness, all is energy, etc. allows us to understand how an electron can be considered, quote, consciousness if one chooses to use that terminology. The observer quantifies the waveform potential at a particular point in space. The potential possibility of the waveform collapses by the act of interaction observation. Being able to interact with it in the form of an observation took away the possibility for it to propagate as a waveform of energy potential and collapsed it into a matter particle. What I have come to understand is that there is a correlation or connection made to collapse a waveform potential into a manifested physical particle. There is a property divergence or a boundary range when macro classical property physical characteristics emerge. At some point, the correlated energies or forces between different aspects of creation, universe reality, in size, number, proximity, etc., create emergent properties. I'm saying, for the classical physical macro characteristics to emerge, the energies and forces between different aspects of creation, which would be subatomic particles, atomic particles, electrons, neutrons, protons, they correlate, they intermingle, and emergent properties will form as a result of greater complexity. There is a range between the macro and micro when a certain scale is reached where certain properties and characteristics of the quantum reality do not apply so much, and the properties and characteristics of the macro world become dominant. The observer that is required needs only be another electron or photon, etc., in close enough proximity to create an interaction in order to collapse the wave function properties and stop the interference pattern from emerging from the probabilistic curve of the wave function. The closer a waveform potential is to other parts of universe, and the more of the other parts there are, the more there is a decoherence from the wave function properties towards particle characteristics. So I'm saying in the proximity creates an interaction, the waveform probabilistic curve disappears and instead collapses as a particle, possibly along that probabilistic curve. The point is it collapsed and became a particle. It's no longer a wave function. Anyways, as I said before, this is just how we perceive it to be propagating as a wave function, because that's what we see as the results, and it's correspond to how waves function, and I think the math corresponds to wave functionality in some respect as well. The closer a waveform... Oh no, I already read that. Alright, next paragraph. Human consciousness is not required to collapse the wave function into behaving mostly like a particle. An observer is any part of the manifested universe in certain proximity relative to its size, which can create a connection. This proximity is what creates a localization, or is it a type of entanglement? I don't know. I'd have to go learn more, because entanglement is when two things are connected and then you separate them by any amount of distance, and what happens to one affects the other. So if one goes up, the other goes down, something like that. So this proximity is what creates a localization, so I know that a proximity can create an entanglement, so I don't know if a localization creates an entanglement, which then, even in unlocalization, the entanglement is still present. Not sure. I think the entanglement can only occur in localized things. I'm not sure the entanglement stays in unlocalized things. Anyways, there's things if you want to go look into yourself. That's why I put a type of entanglement question mark. Because the two aspects of localization and entanglement are related, I think. But anyways, go look into it yourself if you want to know more. So this proximity is what creates a localization more than a non-localization with other aspects of the universe, and decoherence from the wave function occurs. Non-locality is just referring to the quantum world, and locality referring to the macro world, because where we are, things are localized in a specific area, whereas the quantum world, things are in quantum weirdness, and they go anywhere they want, and it's all random, and it's popping in and out of existence. That's what it means. Is that things weird, things behave in a non-localized manner, as opposed to our reality where they're localized. So the proximity of things as they emerge in complexity is what creates a localization, and maybe an entanglement too, whatever, more than non-localization with other aspects of the universe. And a decoherence from the wave function occurs. So instead of remaining coherent to the wave function probability as a non-localized aspect, when you create complexity and you localize with other aspects of reality, maybe this creates an entanglement and a connection, and this creates coherence to localization and becoming a particle, and decoherence from the wave function. If one thing can, quote, observe another and its position be known, therefore its path known, then it will have an observer effect, making it a definite particle aspect of reality to continue interconnecting with other parts of universe and other forces, energies, to create larger sized components progressing towards more complex macro objects. So the observer, knowing the position of another and therefore knowing its path, not its velocity, but at least you know its path, and you know where it's going to be, you know where it's going, you know where it is in our localized space-time. Right? Right. Then that's the observer effect, making a definite particle because it interconnects with other parts of the universe and can connect with them through forces that only are possible through the interconnection of two things. Whereas if you had one atom separate from another atom, well, they wouldn't be sticking together through a force to make them stick, because they wouldn't be localized. They wouldn't be in a relative proximity for localization between those two things to occur, or for them to become entangled into a greater complexity of components. I've likened it before to Legos. You start with small things and you just build up to bigger things. And yes, of course, in the quantum world and in our reality, things are more complex than Legos, but it's the same thing. Greater complexity, you get bigger things and more things come about. Atoms are atoms. And then eventually you get to the DNA, cells. Well, the atom isn't the cell, the atom isn't the DNA. But because of atoms and complexity and forces and fields and energies coming together, it creates emergent phenomenon and things get built up. Anyways, it's not that complicated if you look at it this way, and things getting built up. But if you take, oh, well, it's all one layer on top of another, so if the first layer is the way it is, then therefore the last layer is the same way as the first layer. No, it's not how it works. It's not, oh, well, the first block is made out of plastic, the Lego block, and therefore if I build a mansion within a mansion within a mansion, well, they're all still Lego blocks. Well, it's not the way it works. Blind correspondence does not work in reality. You cannot blindly correspond things. Stop doing that. Stop blindly corresponding and blindly using analogies and assuming that they're right. No. It's an indicator to help you find reality more through the correspondences, but you still have to verify them. So, quantum world does not blindly apply to our classical localized world. Things are different. People don't want to understand that because they want to believe they're so special and powerful, and they're not, and they have a great place in the universe, and yippee-doo, yippee-doo, yippee-doo. All fantasies of the mind. Why? Because we are weak. We are weak, weak, weak. Emotions manipulate us. We want feel good. We want pleasure. We can't handle the evil. We can't face the negative. And nothing will ever change because we are weak little cowards. Cowards. Everybody is a coward. Everybody is an order follower. Everybody is weak. We have infinite potential and value. And the only way to actualize, realize, and individuate it is to find it. Seek knowledge. Know thyself. Self-knowledge. To get to realization and actualization and individuation, you need self-knowledge, because self-knowledge is self-actualization and self-realization and self-individuation. So, stay ignorant if you want, and never actually evolve. And keep being an unthinking, uncritical person who does not know how to discern reality properly, who lies to themselves every day, because you're a weak coward who's stuck in the emotional mind control traps and feeling good about themselves, feeling good about their lives, can't handle facing the truth. To continue, or in the case of the electron impacting the detection screen, the connectivity with other parts of universe matter create the observer effect to manifest and collapse the wave function potential into a particular location on the screen to be detected. So I'm talking about the double slit experiment, in case you're wondering. If the electron gets detected first, before impaction by an observer, hence the detector, then that interaction with other parts of manifested universe enable wave function decoherence, and the interference pattern does not emerge when it finally hits the detection screen, because it's already been decohered from the wave function and recoalesced into a particle through that observer effect. And then when it hits the screen, it's already a particle, so it hits it as a particle would, always in a straight line. Boom, 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 boom. But If you don't collapse the wave function first, then the only point it will collapse is when it actually hits the screen. So prior to hitting the screen, it was still operating as a wave function, propagation in probabilities. And that's why you'll have the dot appear along the whole area of the screen, but within a probability curve in certain zones of higher impact and other zones of lower impact. That's because it didn't collapse. Versus when you did collapse it with the observer, well, it doesn't take on that effect anymore because it's already collapsed into a particle with its path known. The position is known and the path is known, so then it collapses along that pathway. It hits the screen always in the same place because it's observed. If you don't observe it, then it's still in probabilistic mode until it reaches a certain space-time position where it collapses at a certain point. So since all space-time positions are not the same, the particles do not collapse, the waveform potential does not collapse into a particle at exactly the same spot, because we're at a different time and space and a different space-time, so things happen differently. Erroneous conclusions. Trying to draw conclusions and make judgments on what the double slit experiment means is tricky and can lead to erroneous conceptions. Some people know about the principles of correspondence as exemplified in the phrase as above so below, as below so above, which can also mean the micro is a reflection of the macro and the macro is a reflection of the micro. This can be true in many cases, but not always true. Blindly applying the as above so below mirror principle from the laws of the quantum reality observations to that of the macro classical physical goes against the observations and reality of the macro world. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of blind correspondence and blind analogy. The application of laws, properties, and characteristics from the micro to the macro world when they are not applicable is termed scale confusion, because there is a confusion being made between various scales of reality and different component characteristics that are only applicable up to a certain size, scale, or boundary point. If you look at this is applied in many ways. This isn't just mistakes in the quantum reality. You know how many sizes, magnitude differences? Go look at the videos again on the power of 10 and the zooming in, cosmic zooming in. We're at like 10 to 1. And the smaller things are at 10 to minus many zeros. And you're going to ignorantly think that things in such a huge order of magnitude are going to apply blindly from one scale to the other. Well, let me show you how ignorant you are, and how ignorant other people have been in applying this blindness. I can even show you at the scale of 10 to 1, where we live at, where other things live at. Let's look at animals. Let's look at grasshoppers, and let's look at imaginary gorillas like King Kong. Now, if you were to take King Kong, that constructed being wouldn't even be able to move. The weight it has, the muscles would not even be able to move the weight. So here we have another scale confusion. People think they can just upscale. We're not even talking about huge magnitudes of difference in 10 to 1 to 10 to the minus 4, 5, 6. I don't know how many zeros to get to the smaller atomic scales and things where different rules apply. But people want to apply blind rules, just blind unification, all false unification, false correspondence, false analogy, false as above, so below. And this is false holographic principles, and this is false fractographic principles. It's false. It's all falsity. You're blind. It's like a grasshopper. The grasshopper is super small, but it can jump a lot higher. That's because there's a scale difference. Just like King Kong wouldn't be able to exist because there's a scale difference. When you're that big, it doesn't work. And a grasshopper can jump that high because when you're that small, things change drastically. And we're not even at the atomic level. We're not even at the molecular level of fullerenes and the buckyball. No. We're talking about grasshoppers that is still at 10 to the 1 scale. There's still animals existing in our reality, in the same type of reality, interacting, moving, mobile. They're not plants in another reality. Plants are at the same scale of reality, but they don't live in the same reality as interactivity and mobility as us. Just like a rock doesn't live in the same reality as a plant either. It can't even grow. It's just stationary, completely passive. So there's different scales, and we have to think properly at each scale. You can't blindly transpose principles and laws at one scale into another. You can't take the macro world and apply it to the micro, and you can't take the micro and apply it to the macro. Things change. Get it through your head. Stop believing in bullshit. Many erroneous conclusions are based on faulty interpretations of the data. Some people who espouse interpretations can use misleading words that can imply things that are not true. Those who read what others have to say about interpreting the double slit experiment tacitly accept what they are told due to the sparkle, glitter, or sizzle nature of information and how it can potentially tie into your worldview, your conceptualization of reality and yourself, and allow you to feel good about your belief system, since it can create correspondences that seem to validate fantastic belief systems. This is what I'm talking about. You want to feel good about yourself, you want to feel special, so you're going to accept these bullshit beliefs because they validate fantasies that you want to exist in reality, like how you create your own reality, how your thoughts create reality, how you as an observer create reality, and when you don't look, it's not there. Seen this? The spirit science dude, Jordan Dishnitz or whatever, and Teal Swan, these guys are idiots. New Age idiots. It's been a year or two since I followed them. But when I was looking into, expanding my horizons and getting back into New Age quackery information just to see if any of it had merit, these people, they mix in truth and bullshit. Why? Because they don't think. They just regurgitate. Oh, that feels good. It sounds good. It resonates with me. I'm going to propagate it as truth. I don't have a responsibility to truth to figure out things and see if they're actually true. I'm just going to output shit out of my ass and regurgitate crap that I don't verify because, hey, it sounds good. I don't have a responsibility to propagate truth to other people. That's up to them to verify. It's not up to me to verify what I tell them. No. So let's just everyone act like me. I don't have to verify what I talk and speak to you. And you don't have to verify what you talk and speak to me. And you don't have to verify what you talk and speak to about other people. No one has to verify anything. Anyone can just say whatever the hell they want. No verification is required in what anyone says. Yeah, let's have a world like that, you fucking idiots. People need to verify things. It is your responsibility to verify information. You cannot simply just output information like a garbage trap, like a garbage can. Just input, output. Stimulus, response. You know what that is? That's called an unthinking human. I don't even think you could be called a human being. That's what's called a human animal. Because animals of all kinds have basic stimulus response. And then as you go higher up, more free will is exhibited. More thinking is exhibited. But all animals exhibit basic stimulus response. If you don't want to think and just go according to programmed behavior, then just accept what other people tell you and then output it. You don't have to think about it yourself. Just be like a plant, which is the most basic input and output. As you go up in higher complexity, more free will emerges, but plants do not exhibit that free will, which is going to be coming up in another article. But animals do have free will in higher capacities, and they have higher complexity of behavioral outputs, and some do demonstrate clearly free will capacities, while some demonstrate more stimulus response based capacities, even though they may have some free will. Well, they do have free will clearly, as they're a mobile free entity that can move on this earth. But they don't have the higher order capacities. So everything has stimulus response, but if you're only staying in a stimulus response modality, an input-output, you're not processing, you're not thinking things through, then you're a very low consciousness being. You're not in a human being class anymore. You're very low. You're not thinking for yourself. You're a lower order animal life form that can engage in thought, but doesn't do it all the time because they choose not to do it all the time. You have to actually choose to engage in thought and verify and process information. It cannot just be, oh, whenever it happens, whenever you happen to think of things, whenever you feel the desire to process information, or whenever it doesn't feel good, then you'll decide to process it. No, it doesn't work like that. You have a responsibility to verify information and to process it correctly, and if you don't, you're acting as lower order consciousness, base consciousness, more similar to lower order animal life that doesn't have the capacity of higher order consciousness to engage in higher order complexity and thought processes at will whenever we want. You're not doing that. You're not engaging in your higher order capacities of your infinite value and infinite potential as a human being. You're choosing not to live up to the potential and value you have as this super powerful human being to create good and evil. And as long as you don't learn about yourself and you don't learn how you have this power and you don't learn to think for yourself and learn things properly and care for truth, well, you're just going to create evil. You're not going to create good. Your infinite potential and value will be devalued and rechanneled into things that you're being tricked, manipulated, deceived into believing are good but aren't. And then you're going to perpetuate those things you believe are good but aren't, and therefore you're going to perpetuate evil. To continue, people get away with selling books touting crackpot false interpretations because it sells better. It is more comforting and adds the glitter or rosy-tinted glasses to help them make sense of and explain various aspects of reality. Readers are very lazy and do not do their own research and homework to validate what they read and take in. People gobble up information because it makes them feel good about themselves, their position in the world, their worldview, their self-concept, their self-image. And that's all they care about. Looking at the negative, looking at evil, learning, truth, deeper aspects of morality, no. Because comfort has them blinded in their currently accepted behavioral methodologies, and they don't see any need to change because everything's good the way it is. They have pleasure, they have comfort. So it's my survival, my freedom, my truth. That's Satanism, which is what's behind carnism. And carnism also has solipsism, but they don't really care about truth and morality. They just make it up according to whatever their current behavioral methodologies are in order to sustain those behavioral methodologies and not require it to change, which would require effort and bring them discomfort. To continue, at first I was also convinced by the interpretations of various fantastic outlooks, such as the observer effect, proves human consciousness is required to manifest reality. At some point I eventually looked deeper into how the actual experiment was conducted in order to understand how the alleged observer effect was being applied to determine if the interpretations being espoused by so many were actually valid or not. Yes, this is why I did get into it, because I was re-going through Mark Passio's podcast in order to create semi-transcript notes, whatever. And when I got to podcast, 4, 5, or 6, whichever one it was that he mentioned this, where he said, consciousness creates reality. And I understood as human consciousness in terms of collapsing the wave into a particle. So that's why I was like, well, I think Mark was too much into the New Age conceptions at that time, so I think that's what's sparked me to go research it more is when I came back to Mark's material and I was like, what? Mark actually said this? And I'm like, okay, well, I guess since then he's changed his mind or whatever, but it was my responsibility to verify it for myself, and that's what made me see that it was bullshit. To continue, then through looking at how it was done and understanding the results, I did not arrive at the conclusions of these New Age or pseudo-spiritual concepts. And these pseudo-spiritual concepts are infective or whatever. They can infect your mind. They're like mind viruses. They make you feel good about your self-image, your self-concept, your worldview, your position in the universe. So they easily interject themselves into our minds and propagate. And we want to propagate them as truth because they make us feel good. Once manifestation and particularization occurs, it stays that way independent of consciousness of any kind. Otherwise, after the detector, quote, observer, collapses the wave function potential into a particle and then stops detecting as it continues to pass by, the particle would again revert back to a wave function and the interference pattern would be visible again. And this is what allowed me to understand how it's functioning. Because if you have, so this, they would say, oh, well, the particle is leaving the gun as a particle, but then it impacts as a wave. What's going on? Then they figured out, oh, well, it's the observer that's making it collapse. Yeah, but if so the people that are saying that if you're not looking, then it goes back from a particle into a wave, I can already disprove this unequivocally through the dual slit experiment, which I've just explained. If the detector collapses the wave function into a particle, then after the detector would stop looking at it, it would revert back to a wave function, impact the screen as a wave function. If observer effect was really what was creating the particle, and after the observer wasn't there, then the particle would revert back to a wave since there was no longer an observer, which is how people fail to understand what the observer effect. That's a completely failed understanding. You don't need, if that was true, then when the observer detector would stop looking at the wave function that made it into a particle, it would turn back into a wave function and hit the screen as a wave function. The observer would not matter. But you see, once something is collapsed back into a particle, it stays as a particle. This proves it. Otherwise, it would revert back into a wave function. So, this does not occur because once an observer collapses the wave function potential into a specific point, it remains as a manifested particle unless something is done to it to make it revert to a waveform potential. To make it revert back to a waveform potential. The electron has potential to behave in ways similar to waves and particles. Everything at the micro level has that potential. Then as you co-join and correlate and connect it to different aspects of reality, it localizes, it decoheres from the waveform potential, and eventually that waveform potential probability is so decoherent that it doesn't even exist, essentially. In terms of the math, it won't even happen. The probability is so low it'll never happen. You'll never see it in this universe or even 200 universes. You'll never see it, ever. So I hope this is making more sense. Micro is not macro. A micro becomes the macro. When it does, it loses its micro weirdness and it takes on the localized aspects of classical physics. It doesn't have the quantum small individual potential probabilities that apply in that reality. It's a completely different reality. So some people just need to accept that the moon is always there even when no one is looking at it. Here's a blog post from Scientific American on how the moon is always there even when we're not looking at it. So you can get an explanation of what I'm talking about from scientific perspective. The above article presents a theory I had pieced together from what other experiments I researched were describing. So I had already understood this before even reading this paper because I had actually looked into things myself and pieced together things myself. It is what makes the most sense out of the double slit experiment and quantum microbehavior versus that of the macro world. The quantity and proximity is what I'm talking about. Mentioned proximity earlier. Maybe quantity has not been mentioned yet, but quantity is what quantum is about. So quantum mechanics is about how the quantity of little things, the micro things, how they go from non-localized to localized because of proximity, because of making connections and correspondences. The quantity, the quantum mechanics, the quantity, the small things create the big things. See how it all fits together now? The quantity and proximity of other parts of the universe play a part in the probability shift of having quantum weirdness exhibited or not. The probability shift of having the quantum weirdness exhibited or not. The probability of having it exhibited or not. I've been talking about this before. The probability. That's what it's about. Probability, small scale, quantum. Yes, the probability is there. You will see it. Probability at the macro, universal level of reality? No, probability is not there. Get it? Has to do with quantity and proximity. Other parts, the small parts, they come together, they join, they connect. The different components coordinate and connect according to various forces, fields, and energies, and these quantities and proximities coalesce into greater complexities that eventually reduce the probability shift, the probabilistic curve, and the probabilistic equation as outputting probabilistic certainties that are improbable and uncertain in such a degree that they will never even happen. The more connections are made as things get bigger, more localization occurs, and there is less probability for the quantum mechanical weirdness to be present at the macro scale. That's what I've been talking about. The rules of quantum physics applies at all levels and scales, but the probability of the micro level weirdness occurring at the macro level is so small that it will never happen or be seen in the whole lifetime of the universe, but the possibility is still there according to the math. That's all. Now, there's a possibility and probability that you'll win the lotto. You could play your whole life and you'll never win the lotto. That's another way of understanding it. If you still don't understand how the probability aspect is what occurs, is how the quantum mechanical function, the formula, the math, quantum physics equation, why it applies everywhere. Because it's based on probability, and the probability does manifest in the smaller scale, whereas the probability does not manifest in the larger scale. It just doesn't happen. But the equation still works because what it's outputting is the probability. That's what it's doing. It's telling you the probability. So the probability micro, high. Probability of macro, low, non-existent. Relating the quantum to the classical physical world. And this is the last section. There is an accurate analogy between the micro-quantum reality to be corresponded and mirrored with the macro-physical world. In the same way that energy at the quantum level has potential to exist and can be manifested into the physical as something real, we can take the potential of energy in the realm of mind, mental, thought, imagination, choice, will, available to us and make decisions to act that determine how we live and what we collectively co-create for ourselves. So this is the potential. I've already related this in later work on my natural law, boundary conditions, spectrum of living, and the Philosopher's Stone, in that the potential we have Well, there's two aspects. See, we have the potential to become more actualized, more realized, and more individuated. And that potential that we aspire towards is in the mind, mental, thought, in that other realm. It's already an actual. In terms of the absolute, it's already actualized. But it's a potential for us to aspire to. Whereas in our reality, we have potentials to aspire and actualize our infinite potential and value, to actualize, realize, and individuate ourselves in terms of that absoluteness. But we are actualized right now as actual things. The cup is an actual, things are actually as they are, and they have potential to become something else. But they currently are actually that, and they have the potential to become something else, and that potential is found in higher realms, such as mind, mental, thought, imagination, choice, and will, where we can manifest that potential into the real and make it actual. So it was once actual and had potential becomes a new actual from that potential being actualized. And we can do this ourselves in our own aspects of being and becoming who we want to be, what we want to exemplify, how we want to live our lives. We can apply this same process of creating from the potential possible of our minds, where we envision a fork, and then we manifest that into actuality in the physical. We can do this with ourselves, or we can aspire to a potential, an ideal in our minds, and actually actualize and realize and individuate it into our core being, so that we become what we aspired as an ideal. Those values and morals, we actually become them. Rather than saying that we want to live by them, we actually live by them, and they become a part of who we are and become a part of our core being. This is what a lot of my work has, and yes, it is speculative, but this is what I call the true self, and you can also call it the higher self, because the higher self can be referred to as the higher will, which is natural law, which is morality and good and right and truth and love and all that. Anyways, this is for another time, sidestep, but although it is speculative, it's based in logic, and it is grounded in reality, based in us, based in what we can see as good and evil, as truth and false, as right and wrong. And these are things that exist, and when you go delve more deeply, logically into these things, and you can see that there are higher capacities, that these are manifested capacities from potential realms where they don't need to be manifested. You don't have to do good, you can do evil, and you don't have to do evil, you can do good. These are potentials that can be manifested into actuality, and causal agents are the ones with the power to manifest the potential into actuality. We are the ones that can actualize, individualize, realize ourselves in alignment with our true selves, higher will, truth, love, good, right, morality, natural law. As we become more of that, we become natural law more and more. And that makes us natural law, causal agents of reciprocity and redress. That brings us into the capacity to become natural law, causal agents, rather than ignorant causal agents who create good or evil. Know natural law, and then you can become an actual natural law, natural moral law, causal agent to create right instead of wrong, and to right wrongs when others are wronged, and balance the scales. Because if you let evil run on forever, guess what? Evil takes over and destroys everything. That's entropy, chaos, destruction, and stagnation, end of history. So the only thing to stop evil is to actually stop evil. It has to be quelled, squashed, eradicated. Otherwise it just keeps growing. That's all it wants to do. It wants to consume everything. It wants to take what is good, corrupt it, and make it evil. It wants to take what's innocent, corrupt it and make it evil. Not that it has its own will, but that's its purpose. If you don't go in one polarity, you're automatically going to go towards the other. If you don't go towards syntropy and creation, you're going to go to entropy and annihilation, stagnation. Alright, so that's a little side tangent on that. To continue. Thoughts are the emanation essence for our manifestations of consciousness. Thought, choice, and will are from the mental or mind realm, the imaginal realm. All the potentials for possibilities are first created and exist in the mind, imagination, etc., and are then brought forth into physical reality by our engagement in action to create or manifest. For example, first a fork was thought of, and then a person acted to manifest and create that fork in reality from the realm of thought where it was first conceived. All manifestations of action and behavior start as manifestations in the realm of mind, thought, imagination, etc. This is how we collectively co-create our shared reality experience. A choice made collapses paths of potential that lead to different results and instead manifest the path of potential chosen. So you have all these possibilities, all these potential roads, but if you choose one road, well, you're not walking on the other potential roads, you're walking on the one road you chose. So when you manifest a potential, all the other potential possibilities you're choosing not to manifest, you're choosing one out of the many. That's what judgment is, that's what discernment is. Many animals have this capacity. When you have higher order consciousness, such as humans, which are probably the highest order consciousness animals we can detect right now on our planet, we have this to the highest degree. We have the greatest potential to manifest differences and create new things. Other animals have less potential, but they still have it. They still have potentials of choice. You're telling me animals don't have choice? They don't make choices? Well, wake up. Wake up out of the dream state. Our energy goes into the choices, decisions, actions, behaviors, and habits we engage in. Action and reaction. Cause and effect. We have many choices available. Choosing to act and behave in one way will produce, manifest, and create a certain result. Choosing another way produces something else. Choices collapse the possibilities available to finally produce a specific result. Choice is affected by worldview, beliefs, self-images, self-concepts, desires, time, and resources available, which are the thoughts, feelings, and emotions in the world. Choices are made every day as to what actions will be taken with the time available. This is judgment, so everyone who has a problem with judgment, screw you. As each person does this, we collapse the potentials that are possible to occur through our choice, and then we manifest in conjunction with parts of physical reality that we collectively experience through our actions in the world. So everyone has potentials, they have choices they get to make. They can choose good, they can choose evil, they can choose the wrong path, they can choose the right path, they can choose the straight and narrow, they can choose the wide gate that goes into many false paths. But eventually all these things, we all manifest in our own paths, in our own way, in our own potentials, and we create the world we live in. The world we live in, or remove humans, there wouldn't be the world we live in, there would just be the natural world. So that's not the world I'm talking about. I'm talking about the world we create as humans. All this bullshit we live in. The energy we put out comes back to us through the principle of cause and effect, natural law, the law of attraction, etc. The energy of our thoughts, emotions, and ultimately our actions is how we live. How we express our consciousness affects others, just as their expressions affect us. As we all behave in certain ways, it creates a general way of life for everyone as a result of cause and effect. We are all affected by other people's way of living and their expressions of consciousness in our shared reality. The physical universe reality does not change just by the whims of our thoughts, emotions, and actions. As we all think, feel, and do in the world, that is what we will all live in. That is the reality we co-create. It's not created by our thoughts. If we all think something, then something else is going to manifest. Maybe that's possible. I don't deny that that's possible, but currently that's not demonstrable, and currently that's not how we live. We live by our actions. That's the world we actually create. It's not like, oh, we're infinite beings and oh yeah, we're gonna take the movie Interstellar and it's gonna become a reality now. We're interstellar beings and we're actually we don't live in space-time, but as beings we decided to create our own reality construct and communicate with ourselves and blah blah blah. Well, that's what Interstellar is, but people want to take this as reality and oh, that's what we do is our thoughts and we're all different higher selves, which is false. The higher self is all one thing. We're all the same higher self. There's not all a bunch of different higher selves. Oh yeah, each of us, we're all at a higher self, and we decided we were going to create this reality to experience and learn more. Blah 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 blah. Yes, because we're all creating our own reality, and then when we all decide to get on the same page and change our thoughts and change the way we create reality, then we can go live into another dimension and all this other malarkey beliefs. I'm not saying that's not possible. I'm just saying it's beliefs, and I call it malarkey because it's all fantasy in your mind. It's all just a belief in your mind. It's a story. It's a narrative. It's not reality. Oh, it could be reality. I don't know. I don't live in those other dimensions. I don't fucking care. I don't know if I've mentioned this. I have rants on this, but I haven't posted them. But I really don't care about any of those realities. I don't care at all. I mentioned it in other posts about being grounded in this reality, and this is where I live. But I don't care about those other realities. I live here. So whatever happens there, maybe not. I think that's gonna make me alter my conception of this reality that I live in, that I can experience, and just negate that reality exists just because of another reality. But other people have no problem doing this. They have no problem negating the reality they live in favor of a reality they don't even live in, that they pretend and imagine is real, and that becomes their reality. Now they want to make this an unreality, and they say, oh, well, the underlying implicit energy, well, that's the real reality, and the spiritual dimension is what creates our dimension, and everything that happens there is what creates us. We're only feeling the effects of what happens in the spiritual dimension and all these other realities. Those people are idiots, and you know who you are. One of them is called Constantine Dracoslayer. Yeah. Go look into that New Age bullshit forum if you haven't before. Everything that comes out of certain people's consciousness is a low vibratory bullshit. Low vibratory in terms of the frequency of truth. It's bullshit. That's what this person actually said to import greater importance on his astral travels, remote viewing, and meditation rather than dealing with the real world and on the ground. He was actually saying that those realities are more important because they're the causal realms for what manifest our reality, and we need to know their realities in order to understand our reality, which is bullshit. People like that are stuck in fantasy, stories and narratives, all from their subjective multiverse parallel processing universe inside of themselves, which is not the objective universe of reality that we all exist in. Sorry to burst your bubble. As mentioned in the previous article, there are two general realities operating. Number one, the physical, tangible reality of manifestation around us that we perceive accurately or inaccurately and engage in through our actions, behaviors, habits. This would be reality level 1. Then there's reality level 2, which is the reality of perceptions we hold, the beliefs, worldviews, conceptions that shape how we perceive reality that is existent apart from our perceptions of it. And the perceptual reality would be what I'm talking about as a multi-dimensional, multiverse of parallel processing where we process in parallel to reality. But it's not actual reality because we can imagine whatever we want in our subjective fantasies of our multiverse. How we engage in the primary reality that exists apart from our perceptions is dependent upon the reality of our perceptions and how much it is in alignment with the reality that is extant. We are the ones that shape the secondary reality, the reality in our mind, mental or thought realm. We are the ones that shape the secondary reality, the reality in our mind, mental or thought realm that can lead us to act and behave in certain ways to engage and manifest in the physical universe reality. Alignment, unison, harmony, non-contradiction, non-conflict, etc., with more aspects of truth, reality, what is good, right, and true, will bring about more potential possibilities to choose to manifest and create in the physical world that which is good, right, and true. This is about how we can change the functionality of the world we live in, not change the moon into a piece of cheese or other conceptions of magical powers to alter the physical manifested reality, whether possible or not. Yeah, so what I'm talking about is we need to change our perceptions to align with reality, not so that we can make the moon into cheese or make water into chocolate milk or whatever other stupidity we want to believe in, how special and magically powerful we are, fantasy narratives and stories to make us feel good about ourselves when we're so weak and cowardly that we don't want to seek truth and morality, so we prefer to feel good regarding these falsities and deceptions that are fed to us, and we just buy into them. So what I'm talking about is so that we can create properly in the world that we live in, so we can actually create in truth and morality by aligning our perceptions with the reality of truth and morality. So here I have my infographic on aligning perceptions with reality, a redone version that Mark Passio did. Aligning our perceptions with reality, with what is good, right, and true, is what aligning with natural law entails. The causal energies of the choices, thoughts, emotions, and actions we put out as expressions of our consciousness will manifest the effect into the world as the way we choose to live. Our current way of seeing things is not giving us the full potential possibilities for our positive evolution towards what is good, right, and true. We are currently collapsing the potentials of possibilities into something we do not truly want because of our limited perception and alignment with what is good, right, and true. We are fooled, lied to, deceived, and manipulated into false paths and limited choices to produce socially constructed acceptable results. So if you merge how we collapse waveforms into particles to manifest reality with our thoughts, our mental, imaginal realm, collapsing into actions to produce reality, we can also see how this relates to our ability to perceive reality accurately. The more waveform, the lower the frequency waveform you have, the less contacts you have with reality. So the less points of reality you have. So in a waveform, if a higher frequency waveform collapses, there's going to be more points in the scale. Okay, disregard what I just said. A higher frequency waveform only collapses into one point on the screen. So disregard what I just said about multiple points. I'm trying to reference this in terms of the frequency of perceptions aligning with truth and reality. In these waveforms here in this infographic, you can see that the waveforms make contact with reality in more places because they're more frequent. And you can analogize this to the frequencies and when they collapse into particles. So when they hit the point, when they hit the plane of truth, that's a particle of reality that they grasp. So when you have a lower frequency of vibration, you're grasping lesser and lesser particulars in reality, lesser and lesser aspects of reality. When you have a higher frequency of vibration, you're grasping more particular points in reality, and you're understanding more about reality. Continuing with the same patterns of thought will produce the same results. If we change the way we think, what we think about, what we spend time and pay attention to, and what we choose to do, then we can get different results. If we keep thinking and acting based in illusions, we get more suffering. If we change and instead choose to be in alignment with truth, to think, feel, and act in unison, harmony, and non-contradiction with what is good, right, and true, then we get results based in truth, goodness, and what is right. Free will choice to take action collapses the potential possibilities we can experience and produces what we do experience. So those potential waveforms, they collapse, the possibilities in our mind, they collapse and produce the experienced reality that we have. All those points. The wave function collapses, boom, it creates an aspect of reality that exists, and we can either learn about it or not. And when we use our free will choice, we can manifest new points in reality. We can create good or evil. We can create in right or wrong. We can live in truth or falsity. And that's the experience that's the reality we're going to experience. The world we're going to create and experience is based on what we output, what we're collapsing from all the many possibilities. The waveform of our consciousness, so you can look at the infographic, has all the possibilities. So you can also look at it as making choices. Each point is a choice we make in reality amidst the billions of choices we can make. So when we collapse the wave, it actually becomes one of those points. When we make a choice and act in the world, there's no longer the thousands of possibilities that the waveform analogy represents. And then the waveform analogy collapses into a particle analogy where the choices we had are finally chosen and made a decision into one action. So from the many possibilities to the one actualized action, we have the many possibilities of the waveform to the one impact point on the screen that the particle hit. I hope that can make sense to you. What we pay attention to and what we spend time on determines what we get. Our energy is being directed into certain channels for us to focus our time and energy on. The quality of our attention and the consciousness we hold and express dictates what we manifest. All of the past events and actions from previous choices result in the current present moment being possible and is responsible for the choices we currently have access to. Not paying attention to certain things, ignoring them, will produce undesired results. Shifting our attention and what we spend time on, what we give energy to, has the potential to provide us with the alternate manifestations that are more beneficial than what we are currently co-creating for ourselves. So in regards to time and attention, you need time and attention to change your perspective, your degree. Going back to the analogy at the beginning of the article in the introduction with the optical illusion, you'll think it's real and it's a real thing, even though it can't be real, it's an illusion. But if you change your perspective, if you take the time and energy and the attention, if you move your attention over 1 degree and take the time to move over 1 degree, well then you're going to realize how you're maybe falsely creating your reality, how your perception of reality may be false, and how you can create different reality. So that's how we can potentially create more beneficial manifestations if we actually improve our perspective and see how we're being fooled by illusions because we're limiting the input of our senses. Not that the senses are the problem, is we're limiting the input of the senses. We're not moving around to see 1 or 2 degrees how the staircase is actually built and how it's an illusion. We're not moving 360 degrees to understand it in even more detail. We're just not moving. We're not taking the time to move, and we're not taking the energy to move. We need the energy to move, and we're not taking the time to use that energy to move. We're not using the energy, we're not using the time, and we're not taking the attention required with that time and energy in order to process and in order to intake information and input it from reality through our senses. So if you only have one perspective, you're only looking at it from one way, well, then you're going to be fooled because you're only seeing it one way. What's that one way? It's the one way the dark occultists are feeding it to us. They feed us images, they feed us falsity, they feed us evil, and we buy into it and accept it. And that's our one perspective. We have one perspective of our reality and we accept it as true. And that's the illusion we live in. We're being fooled by these limited one perspectives because we're not taking the time and energy to shift around and then using our attention to look at it from that shifted perspective and seeing how it looks different and seeing how it actually isn't real, seeing that it is an illusion. We have to actually move and take time and energy. You can't stay locked in the same perspective of the dark occultists and what they feed you and what the news feeds you and what everyone feeds you, and be a good order follower and accept the reality we construct for you and just live in that false constructed reality, that illusion, because you're not thinking for yourself. You're not moving around. You're not looking at the different perspective properly. And there are false perspectives. There are bullshit perspectives. There are lying perspectives, clearly. Because we're being given them all the time. They're being fed to us and we buy into them. So not all perspectives are valid. Not all opinions are valid. There aren't always two sides to a story. The truth is the truth. So go find it. Stop accepting the one perspective of the media, of the politics, of your parents, of someone else, of a guru, whatever. Go learn. To continue. If the quality of our attention is based in low awareness of reality and ourselves, that means we have a low consciousness perspective of understanding and are not going to be collapsing the potential possibilities into what is most beneficial for our survival, success, happiness, and positive evolution in body, mind, and spirit. Spending time and paying attention to uncovering why and how the current condition has been created will enable us to be in a better position of understanding the root causal factors that create the effects and symptoms we don't want, and to understand how to actually create what we do want. To get what we truly desire, we must understand what we are doing by paying attention and spending time and energy to uncover how we function and how we are responsible for the way and manner in which we choose to live our lives. We are manifesting and collapsing the quantum wave function of potential actions that permeate in all of what is possible for us to choose. Collectively, as an aggregate of individual consciousness, the time and attention spent hearing, seeing, and talking about things and what we do and work towards are all collapsing the potentials that could exist into that which we get in the present moment. It's all based on us. We can create it differently. I'm not talking about the trees and the grass and the sky and the water. I'm not talking about creating that differently. I'm talking about the world we choose to live in, the way we live our lives. It's all based on us. What we talk about, what we see, what we tell other people, what we spend our time and attention on, it's all based to us. Right now we're in low quality, low base consciousness, garbage in, garbage out, no thinking, no processing, pretty much all stimulus response, input, output, based on single perspectives of illusion to program certain processing, program behaviors from stimulus to engage in that indoctrinated, programmed process in order to produce the output response that they want to have us output and produce according to their limited perspectives. The only way out is ourselves. People need to want to learn. Here, quantum is used to represent a large amount and quantity that is required to get the overall present way of living. We have a general overlaying condition of life on the aggregate quantum scale of all life on the planet. There are also subsets of ways of living, such as human life in general, and we can go into smaller quantities like countries of geographic regions where the condition, way of living, standard of living, and quality of life differs. The regions have certain belief systems and conditioning propagating that enables collective adherence and coherence to specific mindsets of thinking and acting. To manifest a quantum positive change on a large scale for the way of living of everyone to be affected and living in the desire we have for peace, harmony, goodness, etc., requires a quantum cause, which is a cause based in a quantity of individuated consciousnesses coming together as a whole to express consciousness in alignment with the desired result, with natural law, with what is good, right, and true. And if you don't have that quantity of individual people united in good, you won't get that quantity of everyone in the aggregate being united on the same page to create peace, harmony, and goodness. Because the larger is a reflection of the smaller. The world we create is a reflection of how each of us individually create. So it's not the larger as a reflection of the smaller. We can just take the quantum world, which is the smaller, and just reflect it into the localized classical physical world. Oh yeah, we can just blindly apply that. No, I'm talking about real correspondences. Action. The actions we produce as individuals creates the actions that go on in the world. That's just logic. This isn't false blind analogy. This is pure logic analogy. You can clearly see the correspondence. That's how, in this case, as above, so below, does work. We're not talking about quantum realities. We're talking about the same reality. We're just talking about one unit, and then many units. But we're still talking about the same scale of operation, which is humanity and the world we create and live in. We're not talking about quantum reality we can't even see and detect versus the actual reality we see and detect and live in with our senses. There's a big difference. And when you apply individuals to masses, well, you're still talking about the same scale. It ain't a big difference. It's just quantity. That's what we're talking about, quantum here. And in the same way, yes, a quantity does apply in the scale from the big scale to the small scale. So if we're not talking about the same scale, small scale, quantum can emerge new properties, new complexities to create more higher order realities than the basic lower quantity, lower size, and lower scale. Anyways, all stuff for you to contemplate on your own, you'll see. All makes sense once the correspondences and the connections start to be made and the whole puzzle starts to fit together. Or you can keep believing in your new age pseudoscience quackery and just accept beliefs without actually looking into them and figuring them out on your own. To continue, as a failure to understand how what we spend time and energy on and how the quality of our attention affects the quality of our life, we are currently attached to illusions of the senses, materialism, and the physical world, fulfilling our negative ego-based desires, such as the overemphasis on personal survival, comfort, and ease of living at the expense of others, greed, pleasure seeking, etc., which has us choosing certain actions and paths that continue to create uncomfortable living conditions and more chaotic expressions of consciousness. When we choose to do certain things, we are not doing other things we could be doing that could help us create the necessary internal changes in individuated consciousness required for a quantum change to take place. Just as the quantum micro units compose larger matter, we are all quantum units that comprise the shared reality of the way of life we choose to live. So there you go, that's the analogy I'm making there. You have the quantum bits that create the quantum reality. Well, you have the quantum individuated units who coalesce into a greater quantum to create the reality we choose to live in. Make sense? Does to me. When we choose to do certain things, we are not doing other things we could be doing that could help create the necessary internal changes in individuated consciousness required for a quantum change to take place. Just as the quantum microunits compose larger matter, we are all quantum units that comprise the shared reality of the way of life we choose to live. Consciousness creates the secondary reality of our perceptions from the primary reality that is. Note, the primary reality of existence exists first, then the secondary reality of our internal multiverse parallel processing in parallel to the reality of objective reality that exists. That's how consciousness creates that secondary reality. It's consciousness creates the secondary one. It's not consciousness creates the first reality. Consciousness does not create the primary reality. Consciousness creates the secondary reality based on the primary level 1 reality. Level 2 reality is based on level 1 reality. Not the other way around. It's not level 1 is based on our level 2 inner subjective realities that we want to manifest. That's not how it works. It's the way we conceive of things, the way we view things in our own worlds, in our own minds, and the reality that we invent in our minds. That's based on the reality around us. So if people want to lie to us, create falsities, well, that's the reality we're going to create. We're going to create a reality of falsity. It's not going to be a reality. It's going to be an unreality, but we're going to think it's reality. To continue, we need to align our perceptions with the primary reality of actuality in order to have an accurate, correct, good, right, and true representation of what reality truly is. In turn, our perceptions of reality affect the primary reality we are collectively present and existing in. The shared reality we collectively create in via our actions is manifested through our choices that zero in on a specific choice, a specific point particle, of the many potential possible choices, which are the wave potentials that are available. Past choices collapsed previous potentials and created what has been previously experienced, ad infinitum into the past, which led to what is currently here and now, cause and effect, action and reaction, natural law, etc. This is how it works. Whatever's happened in the past affects our choices now that we use to potentially create into the future. We experience our self-inflicted suffering because we don't understand our identification and attachment to illusions and falsity. We don't know enough about the reality within ourselves and in the world without. Letting go of attachment to illusory false beliefs that we base our identity upon will allow us to gain greater self-knowledge, self-awareness, self-realization, etc. To rise above our current condition requires that we rise above our current levels of consciousness and raise ourselves to higher states of awareness and alignment with what is good, right, and true with natural law. Natural law is one creative force, and our free will is another. As we raise consciousness, we understand the purpose of aligning, harmonizing, and uniting our free will creative force with the creative force of the higher will of natural law. This is how we can be more at one with these forces. Living in accordance with natural law is living in unison with the higher forces. So, whether this is real or not, it can always be taken in a symbolic sense, just like left and right brain. Whether it's actually going on physiologically that way, it's still symbolic, and it works as symbolism in terms of unification of things that are opposite and opposed, to unite them and harmonize them together to go past each of their limitations. So here we have our own free will creative force, and how do we harmonize together and raise our consciousness? Well, we go with what is considered the higher creative force, which is what is right, good, and true. Since we're not doing that individually in our lives, then we can conclude that there is a higher force that we aspire to do good rather than evil, but we are kept in ways of doing evil because of the illusions and the lies and the falsity and the manipulations, which keeps us entrenched into a lower consciousness level. And if we want to go to higher states of awareness, higher levels of consciousness, to evolve consciousness, then we need to seek that force of good, what is right, good, and true, and love, natural law, and morality. We need to seek that and align ourselves with it, and that will allow us to go from a lower base consciousness in alignment with evil and falsity towards a higher state of consciousness. So whether this is actually there's no higher self aspect of source emanation for all of us to have the energy of consciousness, whether that exists or not, it's always useful as an analogy to demonstrate the divide between truth and falsity as we exemplify it in our lives. So that would be a lower self as a false self, and a higher self as a true self. If they don't exist, it's all in a speculative sense. They can be said to exist as a force or whatever. But logically and symbolically, well, we can see how these things can help us understand how to better ourselves and how to evolve our consciousness. Because we look at it in a comparative terms, in terms of a dualistic conceptual framework. We have a lower self and a higher self. There's a false self and a true self. Which way do you want to go in life? You want to just stagnate where you are? You want to stagnate downwards, or do you want to progress in effort and work towards evolving upwards towards the higher self, the true self? Which again, we can use as a symbol if you don't want to accept it as a real thing, as a possible real thing. You can accept it as a symbol for striving towards what is right, good, and true, which is the force of truth, love, good, right, morality, natural law. And that is the force of the higher will of creation, which is the higher self, and that is the true self, which is the same for everyone. Alignment, accordance, unison, harmony, non-contradiction, non-opposition, etc. to natural law is what is right, good, and true, is a sort of reciprocal, mutual respect inherent in the universe. If we live by the laws of the universe, universal cosmic natural moral law, and not by our selfish ego and self-destructive desires and manifestations of consciousness to co-create self-inflicted suffering, then we are complying with established principles that are there for our own betterment, and the energy we put out that is in harmony with creation, with creating what is right, good, and true, will be reciprocated, mirrored, or reflected back onto us. We can create what we truly desire that is in harmony with natural law. We need to discover, recognize, and align with natural law to know true harmony, peace, and freedom. So that's the end of that article on illusions in the senses. I have elaborated much more than what the article had on several things regarding quantum mechanics. I didn't talk about probability as much in the article. I didn't talk about scale confusion as much in the article. There's many things I brought out in my own research that I didn't put into the article, because when I wrote it, it would have been too long, and I think I even did research after I wrote this article. So, thank you for your time and attention. The next one I will be reading is Ego, Personality, Identity Attachment, which has to do which is a real barrier for our self-knowledge, self-actualization, and self-realization into greater degrees of truth and morality in what is right, good, and true, for the way to live in the right way and the right path to true freedom and peace. So stay tuned for that. Again, thank you for your time and attention. Have a nice day. Take care. Peace.